In the first days of the North Kingdom, they built a great watchtower on Weathertop. Amon Sûl they called it. It was burned and broken, and nothing remains of it now but a tumbled ring, like a rough crown on the old hill's head. Yet once it was tall and fair. It is told that Elendil stood there watching for the coming of Gilgalad out of the west in the days of the last alliance. I'm guest co-host Rob Clark, and you're listening to the Amon Sûl podcast.
Mai Govanan, welcome to Amon Sûl, a podcast for tall hobbits with elvish aspirations. I'm Father Anthony, an Orthodox Christian priest, and here we talk about the works of J.R.R. Tolkien because we love them and believe in their power to orient us toward what is highest and noblest. Today, my guest co-host is Rob Clark, a longtime listener of the Amon Sûl podcast from the Pacific Northwest. Professionally, he works as a data scientist for a large insurance company, but that's not what's important about him. He's a faithful member of St. George Antiochian Orthodox Church in Portland, where he serves as a subdeacon, and he and his wife have 2 young children. He has taught high school literature for 3 years, where he utilized their Taking the Hobbits to Isengard strategy to test his students on their reading comprehension and memory, and he has created a concordance of the Lord of the Rings for his personal use to assist him in analysis of Tolkien's genius. Rob, it is a great pleasure to have you here today. Welcome to the Amon Sûl podcast.
It is a great pleasure to be here, Father Anthony, and I just want to say to your readers, or your audience rather, that I am so excited that we are going to finally give the most satisfactory answer ever to who is Tom Bombadil. Some people might be questioning whether I'm trolling your audience right now or not, but my friends in the Pacific Northwest know the answer to that. But we'll find out when we get to the end.
Way to tease. Yes, and that is what we're talking about. This is the day we're talking about the 7th chapter of The Lord of the Rings, entitled In the House of Tom Bombadil. Now, Rob has a great many thoughts about our yellow-booted friend, and he requested especially that he can come on the podcast to talk about one of these chapters, including him. But before we get to all that, Rob, we should begin by asking you how you first came to connect with the works of J.R.R. Tolkien. What is your earliest memory of that, or if you'd like to skip the earliest memory, a favorite memory, or just tell the whole story?
I think that I will be the first person in the history of Amon Sûl to say that I was introduced to The Lord of the Rings through a Foxtrot comic.
That's awesome.
So Tolkien was not on my radar growing up, but I did read the comics and the newspapers every day religiously, and I used to read Foxtrot. And it's probably the late '90s, around the time that the movies were announced. The younger character, I can't remember his name, and his friend are geeking out about
Yep.
the Lord of the Rings movie coming up, and they are role playing these characters, and that was fun. But I didn't read the book until a couple years later, and my memory of it was getting to the scene where Shelob poisons Frodo,
Right.
and it was the first time I had read a book where all the emotion that the author is trying to convey, in this case the darkness, really sat with me, and I actually had to put the book down for a month before I could pick it up again.
Yeah.
But pick it up I did, and I've read it every year or so, maybe a year or two since then, and I think it's a lot of fun. And so here I am today, talking with whoever is willing to listen to me talk about it.
Concordance in hand, and
Concordance in hand.
and ready to rumble.
That's right. That's right.
You know, that Shelob scene is really so intense, so evocative, so so much a collision of so many things all at once. And I was rereading it not that long ago and was really struck how much of his own, unpublished stuff Tolkien throws into that as well. It's the one place too where the Elven for Hail Earendel, brightest of right, that shows up in that chapter. There's a lot going on. Good stuff. All right. So beyond that, Father Andrew came up with these questions way back at the beginning, but we always like to ask our first, especially our first-time guest co-hosts, one of these questions to get a sense of how you personally interact with Tolkien's works. So, if you had to pick one character in Tolkien's works whom you are most like, who would that be and why?
So I'll tell you, I've been listening to this podcast since the beginning, and I've always hated this question.
Yep.
But I've taken it on as a spiritual discipline to try to answer it, because I've wrestled with it, you know, I don't know, how many episodes do you have now? That many times.
Mm. Bravo, Sue.
Yeah, and so I'm gonna have to say, I think I am most like Mary. Not because, I'm handy with, an enchanted blade, but because while he isn't necessarily the one getting into trouble,
Hmm.
he's fast friends with the ones who are,
Right.
and, that I think is, uh, typical of my life growing up. I was a good kid, but I did tend to make friends with the kids who got in trouble,
So
so
you were trouble adjacent.
I was trouble adjacent, yeah.
And maybe had a few Pippins in your life who kept on throwing rocks down and waking up ancient evils.
I did, yes, yeah, they're a hoot. One of them celebrated his birthday yesterday,
Oh,
yeah.
thank God he lived through all that. That's a beautiful answer. I like that. With the criticism of the question kind of contained within it, but also the willingness to submit to the scrutiny. So,
Well, there's nothing wrong with the question. The problems with me is I've always had a hard time identifying with characters and stories, which is a wonder why I enjoy reading so much, I guess. But yeah, but it's
well, in a sense, that makes sense though, because we don't. I always heard it said, we read these stories so that we can see ourselves in the story, but. But I always enjoyed interacting with the characters. I didn't. Now I'm making this about me, but I didn't have a large circle of friends growing up. The characters sketched by really good authors, hopefully good authors, was a way to broaden my experience, and I felt less lonely. Oh, well, that got deep, but I don't need to identify with them. I just want people to interact with,
I like that.
perhaps. All right. At any rate, since you talked about your work, or I talked about it in introducing you, I'm going to ask an irritating question and inquire whether the works of J.R.R. Tolkien bring any particular insight or value to your work as a data scientist. Do you see or experience any connection there?
Well, I
Or perhaps you've applied your expertise with data analysis in a different way related to Tolkien, maybe that concordance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the concordance is how I got my current job. I've been at this insurance company for 18 years, and I was doing reporting, and part of that involved learning this application called Power BI. It's not a super exciting uh, application, but some of your listeners will know it, I'm sure. But anyway, I was reading the Tolkien companion, sorry, the Lord of the Rings companion, and I read this note on the passage at I think it's the beginning of the next chapter that you're going to be talking about, and Hammond and Skull mentioned this sort of subplot of dreams, and it got me thinking, and I'm like, well, I really want to. I love a close reading of the text, and I really want a close reading about dreams and water and all this kind of stuff that come up in those dreams, and it's hard to do in a 1,000-page book, right? Close reading is very hard to do. But I had this uh, this skill that had been I'd been working on, and so I just said, well, maybe I can use Power BI to break out all the words and index their location everywhere. So that's what I did. It took me a few weeks to get it figured out, and but now I have a tool where I can search a word, I can search a phrase, and I can find where exactly it exists. So, you've got and the index is like, first volume, second book, third chapter, fifth paragraph, third sentence, that kind of thing. All these series of numbers, little decimals in between them, and it's really helpful because I'm able to find words and word patterns that I hadn't before. I'm planning to do a lot more tinkering with it, but I showed it off at work, and the person who's now my boss really liked it,
Yep.
and that got us talking, and I got to sit in with their team for a little bit, and then finally I ended up on the team formally. So
That's awesome.
um, yeah, Tolkien doesn't so much inform my work, but I think he's helped my career progress at the very least.
That's actually a really neat answer. I wouldn't expect that, but then again, so many of the things that we love that we throw ourselves into then also become we shape ourselves around them, and it turns out that enthusiasm actually can be applied in a lot of different places. So I remember hearing stories. I never played much massively multiplayer online, like World of Warcraft or whatever. But I remember hearing stories about people who led raids, putting that on their resume when they were trying to get a organizational job. Like, see, I know how to manage people. If I can manage people without being able to fire them, I can totally manage your fast food team or whatever.
That's
But
fabulous.
very good. Well, thank you, Rob, for introducing yourself to us that way. And with that, I think we can move on. So our next segment is our listener questions and comments, which we've actually had a wonderful and consistent flow of these coming in. Our first one, though, is an old one back from back in 2023, but I don't think it's quite irrelevant to our conversation today, even if it's a little bit from a different angle. So I'll read this one so you can begin our response to it, Rob. So this came from listener Cade Meinel, who I actually realized I've included a lot of Cade's emails here. He's always very thoughtful. So he writes, Dear Richard Rowland, that's Deacon Seraphim now, and Father Andrew Stephen Damick. I have a question related to story and identity. This question is based on a couple of different thoughts from both the podcast Lord of Spirits and Amon Sûl. I am not the same podcast guy, he notes. In the wrap-up segment of the Samsonite episode, Father DeYoung compared telling a story about oneself to form an individual's identity with the living out of a way of life, specifically monks embodying Christianity. In this context, the storytelling was a type of postmodernism. I know on Amon Sûl the concept of story gets discussed very often, but it is often in a more positive context about what story can do to help us see how we should live. I found the way that Father DeYoung described changing how one tells the events of his or her story to create a new identity day to day. This seems to fit with the way that Turin renames himself often. I know that there's already been an episode on the names of Turin, if I remember correctly. I think that theme was actually, it's been very frequent through the years of the podcast. But he says, I feel like in light of Father DeYoung's comments, it struck me again that Turin, in his name choices, tells a story about himself. This makes me wonder, is it the autobiographical nature of the story that makes it a problem in the case of Turin and postmodern identity? On the other hand, in the end of the last Amon Sûl episode, back in, again, April of 2023, Richard again referred to the concept of fairy stories as being in a dream another mind is weaving. While there was some discussion that this status might be good or bad depending on the mind one is caught up in, this case seems to be a counterpoint to my thoughts on autobiography being the problem of certain kinds of story. All that to say, what is a summary of the relationship between identity and story in the legendarium? I know it's come up often in the podcast, but I cannot recall all the details going back from some of the earliest episodes about story with Deacon Nicholas Kotar up until now. I know that story can help people to see beyond themselves, but how does that create an identity for people? Is it a new identity by identifying with things in the good stories, or is there something more to it? And then he gives some background. He says, I'm particularly interested because I'm in a PhD program in history, and I'm studying the transition from Roman to non-Roman identity during late antiquity. Thanks, Cade. So I really want to hear your thoughts on this, Rob, not least because I feel like it almost connects with your frustration with the question about what story do I see, what character do you see yourself in that I just asked you. But
Yeah, I hadn't made that connection. Yeah, it's an interesting question, Cade. And one thing I think we need to do from the top is realize that when we talk about identity today in 2025, it's probably a very different question than when Tolkien is talking about identity, back in the 1950s, right? It just sits differently in the zeitgeist than it did back then. I went and looked in the my copy of Tolkien's letters to see if how identity comes up, and at least the word identity, it's not indexed in the back, so I couldn't go and find any discussion of it. But I do think that we need to sort of be careful not to universalize it too much, right? Because most of the people in Middle Earth, as far as we know, have no story that's been told to us, right? They're ostensibly millions of people, right? And we never learn about them. The best example of this, I think, is when Sam encounters the dead Southron soldier, and he wonders, who this person is. This is the person whose entire story, from our perspective, is wrapped up in this brief, violent scene, and then he just dies. And and Sam, I think, gets to the heart of it and realizes that that is not his story. That's the story we're given. That's not his story. So I think we need to be careful about universalizing the story and identity connection too much, especially when we look at people like Turin, right? Where Turin's propensity to name himself based on his deeds is not great, right? So I think the best situation in Middle Earth for receiving an identity based on some sort of story is when it's received from outside oneself, right? The elves don't say you are an elf friend now. They say I name you elf friend, right? We're going to talk about it a little bit more, or a lot more later on, right? But when Frodo asks who is Tom Bombadil, right? Our instinct, is to say, yeah, who is Tom Bombadil? What we kind of mean by that is sort of what is Tom Bombadil? Like it's this thing intrinsic of himself, as opposed to, this question of who. And I'd say sort of at the end of this, so as not to drag on too long, but I think this is really instructive scene towards the end of the Two Towers, where Frodo and Sam and Gollum are climbing up Cirith Ungol, and I've got my notes here, so I'm gonna try to read it. Uh, uh, Smeagol calls himself a sneak, and Frodo admonishes him, "Don't take names to yourself. It's
ah,
unwise, whether they are true or false."
mm-hmm.
To which Smeagol replies, Smeagol has to take what's given him. He was given that name by kind Master Samwise. And of course, we all know
Yeah.
what happens afterwards. But I think, when it comes to connecting narrative to identity, I think it's best when it comes from outside. And I think there's still some suggestion that we still have some agency over that too, right? Frodo would suggest that, although Smeagol binds himself to it in the end. But I think the question of who one is more tightly bound up just in the name a person has, and we'll
Mm-hmm.
talk about that more as
Right.
we go on.
I'm glad. I like your reflections on this, Rob. I put this in not least because all through this chapter, I almost lose count of the number of times that they ask Tom who he is and get what feel like really are unsatisfactory answers that really do seem to be Tolkien not engaging with the modern notion of identity, but then again, maybe he is, or the roots of it. And you quoted Tom, "Don't you know my name yet?" That's the only answer. But what he says after that is really interesting. "Tell me, who are you alone, yourself and nameless?" but you are young and I am old. And that I think connects with what Father Stephen, DeYoung would say. We're defined by our deeds, not by the stories that we tell about ourselves. Or perhaps if you want to tell a story about yourself, let it be told in action, not in word. And then also, Tom, he says, who are you alone, right? You're defined by your relationships.
Which is another way Father Stephen talks about identity. I think later on than maybe uh, in time than when Kate is writing, talks about relationships being the nexus of, or sorry, identity being the nexus of our relationships, which I like that. I
Yeah,
think
it's a good
I think it helps.
phrase, and yeah, and hey, I have nothing to do with Lord of Spirits, so it's not the same podcast, but we can sure reflect on it. So
Sure,
very
sure.
good. All right, let's move on to our next reading. For our second listener comment, we have a thoughtful reflection from listener Keith that came in towards the beginning of May of this year. Rob, would you read this one?
Sure. So this is from listener Mick. He says, "Dear Father Andrew and Mr. Roland," we're going to have to teach people to use the correct address there. I was just listening to Matt Fradd's interview with Ben Rimehart, Franciscan University, Steubenville, on Tolkien and his works. In the Q&A, a listener asked about whom in Christendom Tom Bombadil represents. Dr. Reinhardt's response makes me wonder, aren't Tom and Goldberry Tolkien's imagination of unfallen Adam and Eve? My first counterargument is that if so, they are not fulfilling the imperative to fill the earth, presumably with their kind. They act as orderers and stewards, harmoniously relating to creation, dwelling within and expanding the garden. Tom is unaffected by the temptation of the ring to seek power. Goldberry is a counterpart and cooperator for Tom. They express a nearly optimal masculinity and femininity of humanity in creation. I'm pretty sure I'm wrong, but how? Why would Tolkien present this kind of almost just right picture? At the end, in front of the hearth at Bag End in Samwise and Rose, he gives a simple and attainable picture of fruitful marriage and home. Is it fair or appropriate to contrast these two marriages? Kind regards from a loyal listener to all of Father Andrew's episodes. Deacon Seraphim tends to speak beyond my reading and capacity for comprehension.
Oh, that's delightful. I realized I messed up our script. And yes, this is from not listener Keith from the beginning of May, but listener Mick from September of 2023. So that's what I get for recycling my scripts. I found this fascinating. We decided when we first talked about this, Rob, that we were not going to identify Tom and Goldberry as anybody in particular. And then we have this listener, comment that really demands, in a sense, that we do so. So I'm just going to run through this because I got to get it out of my system. So there was an argument, a paper that was written, and I forget the author of it, but I'm stealing. I'm not saying I believe this. I'm saying I can't get it out of my head. The argument is that Tom shows all the hallmarks, and Goldberry as well, of if they're going to be identified with anyone that fits within the ultimate cosmology of Middle Earth, then they have to be Ainur, and the amount of power that they show really sets them at valor level and not Maya. Okay. And then the writer goes on to argue that they are Aule and Yavanna. Now, I'm not going to say I think this is true, but since we're talking Adam and Eve, here's the way that argument would go, interacting with at least this question of the two of them as almost an idealized marriage. Because Aule and Yavanna are somewhat unique in the Silmarillion as being depicted as having a not entirely harmonious marriage. There's a whole chapter of Aule and Yavanna that shows them, on the one hand, Aule fixating on things that he makes and not really caring at all for Yavanna and her trees, and Yavanna determined to find protectors for her trees. And this is really the backstory of the Ents. But there are elements of that I think echo perhaps, and we always say we don't want to focus on the biographical fallacy, as it were, trying to see where Tolkien put his own life in there. But there are elements of the creator, the sub-creator, that Tolkien is definitely playing out. We see him talk about that kind of thing in Mythopoeia, and then we see it again in Aule making the dwarves, and then submitting them ultimately to Iluvatar's will, and really struggling with this question of creation versus control, which means that unusually for angelic beings, we're seeing actual growth and development and change occur. So the argument basically is that perhaps Tom and Goldberry are actually Aule and Yavanna, living not as the masters and dominators of the creation that they had been in being the sub creators of Arda itself under Iluvatar, but living effectively with a vow of poverty in a quiet retirement, or perhaps simply nurturing and protecting without controlling the children of Iluvatar, the smallest of the children of Iluvatar being, the hobbits there on the borders of the Shire. Um, Again, every time I read the chapter, I can't get the idea out of my head. I think there's something beautiful about the thought. Um, am I going to say that's what's going on? No. But I do think that there may be valuable insights to be gained by thinking about it. And again, this is not engaging quite as much as I'd like with mix email, but to his question, why would Tolkien present this kind of almost just right picture? And I think part of this has to be connected with his own marriage, his own orphanage, being orphaned, losing the chance to see his own parents, losing his mother very young, and then the struggles of marriage and parenthood with his own wife, which are the things that he's dealing with in real time as he's writing these stories. I think it makes sense that he would put in a perfect harmony, trying to depict a perfect harmony there. So maybe we shouldn't contrast Sam and Rose with Tom Bombadil and Goldberry so much as we should view them as different pictures, different imaginings, different depictions of the same ultimate idea. Anyway, I'm talking more than I meant to on that, but what are your thoughts, Rob? Feel free to tear me apart.
No, no. I mean, I think it's a lovely idea. I guess what I'd say to Mick is, it's really satisfying to find. Speaking as one who, like I said at the beginning, really enjoys a close reading. It's really satisfying to find patterns, right? And then to see them work. And but I think we need to be careful, right? You asked a question, Mick, whether or not you were wrong, and I wouldn't say you're wrong. I would say using using an analogy to understand the text is limiting, right? You're the and that, I think, is, if there's a problem there, that's where the problem is. It's in its limits. So when you find a pattern, or when you think you found a pattern, especially if it's some sort of analogy, especially if you keep in mind that Tolkien, he doesn't really like, at least he says, he doesn't really like analogies. He doesn't really like, um, what's the word I'm looking for? Allegory,
Allegory.
right?
Yeah,
Right.
not a fan.
But yeah, he's not a fan, right? So we need to be careful there, but we need to really ask ourselves, if this pattern is true, what does this tell me about the story? How does this help me better understand what I'm reading? We talk about the works of Tolkien because we love them, and we believe in their power to orient us to what is highest and noblest. Did I get that right, Father Anthony? I think
That's
I
about
think
as
that's pretty close.
perfect as we could, as you could recite it. Yeah.
Right. So then, so the idea here is, then we have a pattern. The pattern helps us understand the story. The story orients us in this way, right? And we just need to make sure that we don't fall in love with our pattern so much that we lose sight of the story. And so I'd say, go right ahead and continue considering, meditating on how that pattern might fit. But keep your eyes open to where it doesn't fit, and let yourself be okay with that, right? Because you don't want to lose sight of the story for the your interest in this particular pattern.
Yeah, I think that's beautiful, Rob. And it says better almost what I was trying to get at, which is, the reason I think that I can't let go of that thesis about Aule and Yavanna, it actually comes with a little bit of, failed attempts at storytelling myself, where I was kind of noodling around the idea of, again, running off of Lord of Spirits, what would it actually look like, an interaction with an unfallen angel in charge of, responsible for a particular nation or people? How would that angelic power interact with the people that it was caring for and shepherding? And, I wrestled with it, thought, I don't know how to do this. There goes that plot idea. I've got two full-time jobs anyway. Um, but reading this chapter again, I had to think, that's what it would look like if mortals ever visited a space of the gods who were actually in faithful service to the one true God. It would look like Tom and Goldberry, which need not then be Aule and Yavanna. It need not be any particular character. It's an image of harmony and wholeness and self-limitation and obedience and faithfulness within the parameters of a life well lived, perhaps, and there's an applicability there without needing to be, insistent about an allegory or an identity. Any other thoughts, Rob?
I've got lots, but we only have 3 hours.
We can go over. There's, all right. Yeah, we could keep talking about this, but maybe we just need to do a whole nother episode about it. All right. Mick, if you ever write back with a further discussion of the significance of Edenic parallels with Tom and Goldberry or anyone else, I think that both Rob and I would like to continue that conversation. If you're still listening, Mick, feel free to continue the conversation. All right.
And if Mick isn't listening, Mick's friends should tap Mick on the shoulder and tell him to go back and listen to this episode.
That's right. All right. For our third listener comment, I cannot let the moment pass without including this beautiful note from a very old friend of mine, listener Kate in the UK. So I'll read this one. She says, "Dear Father Anthony, I hope this is not the first letter addressed to yourself since your debut in hosting the podcast. Not at all, but thank you, Kate. I wanted to write to thank you because I am enjoying it and your development of the format very much. I mostly like to listen when I am gardening, where I feel like a hobbit, especially when the sun shines on my little patch of Yorkshire, or when I have a repetitive stack of papers to process at work. My body may be at my desk, but I am really going on rabbit trails in Middle-earth. In both cases, the slight ramblingness and considerable length of the podcast is a feature, not a bug. Thumbs up. You've inspired me to pick up the fellowship and begin to read. I'm especially paying attention to dialogue of characters this go-round, as I've been consumed by orcs too many times when listening to They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard, which is the most annoying song when your children begin to play it over and over in the car. I only persevere the seconds of it on the podcast because I enjoy the game. Cannot wait until you arrive at the House of Tom Bombadil. Looking forward to scholarly insights into a character who has baffled me for years. But I love him. I've just left him in Goldberry for Bree. Who is he? And can I sign up for his permaculture forest gardening course, please?" So, all right. So 3 things. First, great to hear from you again, Kate. I have fond memories of talking, I think, even about Tolkien back in high school. Second, best of success with your gardening. Third, regarding Tom Bombadil, we'll do our best, but I think if you got this far, you already heard my best is really just rehashing old internet theories from the 90s. Rob is going to be much better about that than I am. Long story short, I think a definitive answer is just not on offer. Or if it is, it will be much maligned by those who disagree. So,
Certainly.
And I think that's all we've got for questions and comments today. Please feel free to send more to us at Amon Sûl at ancientfaith.com, or you can message us via the Facebook page, and you may very well hear it on an episode to come. Before we move on, I want to boast again and note that we're really able to address a lot of these notes in real time as we move forward with the read-through. So please feel free to write us if you have thoughts and become part of the conversation. You can even write in multiple times, and we'll carry it on, over multiple episodes. While we are urging you to write to us, remember we are always looking for new photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it, so we can feature them on YouTube during the podcast opening there. So if you live or work or commute under the shadow of Amon Sûl, please share a photo with us. So, this brings us to the main portion of our episode today. I've asked Rob to come on the podcast today, or rather, Rob asked if he could come on to the podcast today to talk about the 7th chapter of the Fellowship of the Ring in the House of Tom Bombadil. This is one of the most beautiful and unusual chapters of the entire book, and really, I think, of all of literature. We can see that unusualness just from the way the outline runs in a completely different way from other chapters. In the sense of the plot, nothing at all happens. They stay at the house of a weird man, and his wife, and have a lovely time, and then they leave again. But there's a very great deal more happening here than that. So as always, we'll start with the outline of the chapter and urge you all to pause and go reread before walking through it with us. That way you can check us on our accuracy and our outline and be fresh for the conversation. So, hopefully you went and read. Welcome back. Here we go. I see 5 portions to this chapter. First, arriving. And there we actually have to start with the previous chapter, their journey following Tom after the Old Man Willow episode. They follow him on the path, they fall far behind him, and they arrive at his house after dark. Tom and Goldberry are both singing as they approach. They enter the house and meet Goldberry. They are struck dumb at first, and then Frodo waxes eloquent and asks who Tom Bombadil is. Her strange answer launches a million internet theories and a very unfortunate decision by the Rings of Power showrunners. Then Tom comes in and shows them where to wash and prepare for dinner. Part 2, dinner and the conversation after. Tom and Goldberry serve them and then clean up afterwards, showing what good hospitality looks like. Goldberry leaves them immediately, telling them to heed no nightly noises. Tom stays and talks with them for a bit. Everything he says is in poetry. They go to sleep. He, too, says heed no nightly noises. Part 3, dreams. All 4 of the hobbits have dreams. Frodo, in his dream, sees Gandalf at Orthanc when the eagle comes and rescues him. Pippin has a troubled dream about willow noises, as though he's inside the willow again. But he is comforted when he wakes and remembers Tom and Goldberry's words. Merry dreams of water, and he fears drowning, but he also wakes and remembers words of comfort and protection. Sam doesn't dream at all. He sleeps like a log. Part 4. In the morning, it's Goldberry's washing day, and they spend the day talking with Tom. They eat a hearty breakfast, and after breakfast, they hear Goldberry above them, singing what is clearly a rain song. Tom says it's Goldberry's washing day, and it's too wet for them to travel. So they stay and talk, or rather, they listen. Tom tells stories first of the forest, and then of the old kingdoms of men where the forest used to be, and of the Barrow Wights that now inhabit those tombs, and then he tells older stories going all the way back to the elves under the starlight. Frodo asks Tom who he is. Tom says many things, but mostly that he is eldest. Then Goldberry comes back and tells them the rain is over. And part 5, supper again on the second day. Tom and Goldberry serve them, notably wearing different clothes than before. After dinner, Goldberry sings for them, and then Tom inquires after their business. He knows a lot already. He even knows about the ring. He asks to see it, then he puts it on and wears it without turning invisible. Frodo is piqued and puts it on himself to try to get a jump back on Tom. The others can't see him, but Tom can, and tells him to take it off. With laughter. They make a plan to leave the next day and to travel through the Barrow Downs. Tom gives them a rhyme to call him for help if they get into trouble. And really, that's it. It's just a series of sleeps, meals, songs, and conversations. but all of them are remarkable, and there's a great deal here to reflect on, especially the first encounter with Goldberry and Tom in their own house is profoundly striking, even moving, and therefore we're going to read almost all of that, I think, in bite-sized chunks so we can talk about it one piece at a time, and then we'll look at some pieces from their conversations with Tom on the second day. This chapter, though, it gives birth to a huge amount of speculation. So before we get into the chapter itself, Rob, I want to briefly list all the things I've heard Tom Bombadil associated with or have wondered at myself. In no particular order, they include the figure Vainamoinen from the Finnish Kalevala, uh, or perhaps some one or other of the Ainur, maybe even Aule, or perhaps a meditation on marriage in general, or maybe Tolkien's own marriage in particular. Or, in Tolkien's words, he is the spirit of the Oxfordshire countryside. Or he's perhaps some sort of Christ figure. I don't really buy this, though. Or perhaps he's a natural phenomenon that doesn't need to be taxonomized. I think those are your words, Rob, and they're good words. Or maybe he's just a cameo of that Dutch doll belonging to the Tolkien children. Or maybe he's a reflection of Tolkien's childhood, his orphanhood, his struggles with his inability to see his parents' marriage. Or perhaps he's a type of Melchizedek. Or maybe he's a general type of priesthood. And then finally, there is that recurring, consistent theme of non-possessiveness. Tom being one who possesses nothing and no one, but is therefore master of himself and of all within his small realm. So, that's what I've got. Rob, any possibilities or themes about Tom that I missed here? What do you think he's doing here? And more broadly, what do you think is the point of these chapters with Tom and Goldberry in the Old Forest?
Well, before I begin, I just want to say thank you again. When I asked about joining for this episode, I was sure that someone else would have snapped up old Tom, and imagine my delight when that hadn't happened. So I feel like I have the chance to observe one of the jewels in the crown of the Lord of the Rings here. So thank you. I the question of who is Tom is fascinating. Of course, something that, even though I've got kind of a cranky response ultimately about, just letting him be. Spoilers, folks. I can't help think about it anyway, and I've always thought about it. Just in the last couple weeks, it struck me that he's kind of an anti-Sisyphus. If you're familiar with the myth of Sisyphus by Camus, I'm sure Tolkien must have encountered Camus because they were writing around the same time. I'm sure that they would not have liked each other's writings very much, but I can't find any comments by Tolkien about Camus. So it would be a stretch too far, I think, to say that Tolkien is responding to Camus. But in if what I'm thinking of here is is Tom engaging in this eternally repetitive cycle of tending to Goldberry. Um, Except he's not doing it because life is absurd, right? He's doing this because Goldberry has presented to him, herself to him, and her heart was beating, right? She manifests herself as this physical being so that he could love her and tend to her. And so it has you know infinite meaning because um, life is in this case Goldberry's. But it's just fun. It's a new and undeveloped thought, so I can't really take it anywhere too far. But you know, it's interesting anyway. But I think more importantly, um, as we talk about this throughout the night, I want to engage with this idea of thinking about the what versus the who,
Mm-hmm.
because I think that list that you gave, it's a good list, right? I mean, it's all these things people have been thinking about, but it's most of them are a what, it's an Ainur, is a Maya, forest spirit, a doll, but who is Tom? And Tom's Tom's own reflections on that and Goldberry's too are very to the point and not to be ignored. So it's gonna be fun. But I think I see this passage as strongly paralleled with the Fellowship's encounter in Lothlorien, and again in Ithilien, in can't remember the name of the place off the top of my head, but when they're hanging out
with
with
Faramir.
Faramir in the
Hmm.
caves. And I think something important is happening here in that to sort of riff on what Mick said a little bit, they're entering into a kind of paradise, and they are pulling in to themselves the story of Middle Earth as the gods, for lack of a better word, would have told it, and we'll talk more about that as time goes on. But it's fascinating. It's a fascinating um, point in our story to just to think about who Tom is and what that means. We'll have lots more to say.
So I'm really intrigued by your comment about Tom as an anti-Sisyphus, because I've not read Camus' piece there. I don't know about it, but I know of Sisyphus as the figure that's consistently pushing always pushing the thing up the hill, and it always rolls down on him and crushes him. Um, is that the
Yeah,
basic gist, or there's
yeah,
more going
it's
on?
there's more going on, especially for Camus. So uh, I'm not going to do Camus justice. So all you philosophy students out there, the comments are where the comments are. Light me up. But basically, for Camus, um, life is absurd, right? There is and so for us to live our lives, we have to have some sort of thing, something that gives us purpose, telos, whatever you want to call it, right? And what the what Camus says about Sisyphus is that w- we must imagine him happy because he has found this purpose, and his purpose is this rock, uh, and so despite everything that's happened to him, because Camus has found this purpose as
As pointless as it seems to be, it's his
exactly
thing,
it's his thing,
and therefore he has a thing, he has a
right?
role, he fits, he belongs. This is where he is, and
Yep.
therefore he must be counted the most blessed of men, even though no one would ever really want to take his place. That kind of idea.
Right, right. And Tom is an anti. I think I'm thinking of him as an anti-Sisyphus because he is in telling the story to Frodo and the other hobbits. He clearly sees meaning in um, in life, right? And so that's not the problem for him. It's not that life is absurd. It's that's I don't even know that I don't think he's got a problem, but he's the master, and yet he has this person that he's married to himself who um, who has become his thing, right? There's this great conversation. If you all aren't listening to it, you should. It's the Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast with Professor Corey Olson. And in episodes 27-ish to 32-ish, they're talking about Tom and Goldberry. And one of the listeners um, posits that Goldberry is this spirit of a river flower, of a flower that grows beside a river. And I think it's beautiful, right? If you take Tolkien's idea that Tom is the Oxford countryside, right? If you bring these two together and this idea of telos, it's as if to say that the Oxford countryside, in some sense, exists for the sake of this one little flower
Hmm.
that grows by the side of the river. And do with that what you will. I don't know how to take any meaning from that. It's a beautiful image that
Hmm.
I love.
Sure. So I did understand what you meant with saying he's anti-Sisyphus, an anti-Sisyphus, and I really like that reflection because bringing a man bringing a woman flowers is you either he messed up or he's trying to get something out of her, right? There is a problematic side to that, very frequently because it's a means to an end, and the constant pursuit of that, that is, in almost a very real sense, Sisyphean, in and of itself. The constantly pursuing something and then it rolls down and then you're chasing it again. The whole modern idea of romance really is utterly empty and vain. But then you have Tom, who's not trying to get anything out of Goldberry. This is just this is just what he does. He is
Yeah.
attending to his wife, not for the sake of having children, not for the sake of getting anything out of her, just for the sake of being present with her. And the only thing that we see them doing is together they tend to and protect and equip and prepare the hobbits. So what Tom does is repetitive and constrained, but deeply and perfectly fulfilled, in a way that anyone would look at and actually find appealing, not Sisyphean in the normal use of the word.
Right.
I don't know if that's where you were going.
I'm not sure it's going anywhere with it yet. I've just been kind of thinking on it, but I like the way um, you express that. You know, Sisyphus is experiencing a punishment of the gods, right? And that is his thing. Um, Tom and Goldberry are living out some sort of seasonal rite, right? This is Tom isn't just bringing flowers for his pretty lady, right? He is enacting the end of summer and the beginning of fall. Right? There's some reason to this, and they're participating in the cycles of nature. Um, and I'm just riffing here. This isn't stuff I've like fully developed either, but I think to the antiness of the anti-Sisyphus analogy. It's the meaning is in the cycles of the earth. Um, um,
Right, but what's interesting is normally in a ritual or rite, it's something to do with worship of the gods, or communion with the gods. But Tom and Goldberry are very clearly depicted as themselves the gods in their own garden. But the
right.
garden is not something that they're dominating; they're letting it run wild. Everything has its own, everything possesses itself, and yet they're present in it, celebrating that without and occasionally constraining it when it's going to work to destruction, but mostly tending it and nurturing it in very very small ways. But I may be running in a different direction, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
there's a lot there.
Yeah. There is.
So all right, well, there's a lot of speculation there,
Yes.
but I think moving forward, since we're at about the hour mark, before we actually get to the text, I'm going to pull a bit of a fast one, and we're going to look
Okay.
at something that precedes The Lord of the Rings, because Tom Bombadil actually came first. He preceded The Lord of the Rings. Certainly, he may even have preceded The Hobbit. And one can argue, I think strongly, that the early chapters of the first drafts were actually written around Tom Bombadil. I only bumped into this or was reminded of it today, and I kind of adjusted how I was planning to approach this on the fly. But the basic situation is outlined by Wayne Hammond and Christina Scull in the Lord of the Rings Companion. That's this book, for anyone that hasn't seen this. Anyway, So what they say, I'm going to sum it up. At some point, either in the late 1920s or the early 1930s, the Tolkien children had a, quote, colorful Dutch doll dressed exactly as Tom is described. That's on page 124. It's not clear who gave this doll the name Tom Bombadil, but by 1934, Tolkien had written a poem describing the figure's adventures, and he published that poem under the title The Adventures of Tom Bombadil in the Oxford Magazine in the February issue of that year. Now, The Hobbit wasn't published for 3 more years in 1937, and it proved to be rather popular. People wanted more. So, as Hammond and School sum up the story, on December 16th of 1937, pressed for a new story about hobbits, but temporarily unable to think of one, Tolkien wrote to his publisher, Stanley Unwin, and said, "Perhaps a new, if similar, line. Do you think Tom Bombadil, the spirit of the vanishing Oxford and Berkshire countryside, could be made into the hero of a story? Or is he, as I suspect, fully enshrined in the enclosed verses from the Oxford magazine? Still, I could enlarge the portrait." That's on page 26 of the, I think, original publication of the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. But then almost immediately, Tolkien he began a new story about hobbits, but one in which he incorporated and enlarged in power and significance not only Tom Bombadil, but almost all the other characters who appear in the poem, and he recycled most of Tom's adventures. In his draft letter, I'm still reading Hammond and Sûl's summary. In his draft letter to Peter Hastings, September of 1954, now retrospectively, Tolkien commented that he put Tom Bombadil into The Lord of the Rings, quote, "because I had already invented him independently." Invented is in quotes. "And I wanted an adventure on the way." That's page 192 of Letters of J.R.R. Tolkien. All that is from the Lord of the Rings Companion, pages 127 to 128. So, in the chapters dealing with this stage of the composition and the return to the shadow from the history of Middle-earth, Christopher Tolkien makes 2 things clear. First, that Bombadil was indeed present in the earliest drafts of the story, and second, rather remarkably, that this chapter with Tom Bombadil saw very few edits and has remained almost completely intact as it was when it was first drafted. So, I think that backstory means we ourselves should also start at the very beginning, especially because we do not skip the poetry on this podcast. Not anymore. So we're going to read the entire poem, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, which was eventually published in the collection of Hobbit poetry by the same name, The Adventures of Tom Bombadil, as a standalone volume in 1962, some years after The Lord of the Rings. I first saw it in the Tolkien Reader from I think 1966, a little bit later, but it's also published in Tales of the Perilous Realm and all sorts of places. So let's read the poem. Rob, would you begin, and then we'll take it in turns through the whole poem.
Sure. And isn't it just like Tolkien to say, how about this one character, and then just go on and just blow up everything else? And
Uh-huh.
it's great. I love it. All right. The Adventures of Tom Bombadil. Old Tom Bombadil was a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket was, and his boots were yellow. Green were his girdle, and his breeches all of leather. He wore in his tall hat a swan wing feather. He lived up under hill, where the withy windle ran from a grassy well down into the dingle. Old Tom in summertime walked about the meadows, gathering the buttercups, running after shadows, tickling the bumblebees that buzzed among the flowers, sitting by the waterside for hours upon hours.
There his beard dangled long down into the water. Up came Goldberry, the river woman's daughter. Pulled Tom's hanging hair, in he went a-wallowing, under the water lilies bubbling and a-swallowing. "Hey, Tom Bombadil, whither are you going?" said fair Goldberry. "Bubbles you are blowing, frightening the finny fish and the brown water rat, startling the dab chicks and drowning your feather hat." "You bring it back again, there's a pretty maiden," said Tom Bombadil. "I do not care for waiting. Go down, sleep again, where the pools are shady, far below willow roots, little water lady." Back to her mother's house, in the deepest hollow, swam young Goldberry, but Tom he would not follow. On knotted willow roots he sat in sunny weather, drying his yellow boots. and his draggled feather.
Up woke Willowman, began upon his singing, sang Tom fast asleep, underneath under branches swinging. In a crack caught him tight, snick, it closed together. Trapped Tom Bombadil, coat and hat and feather. Ha! Tom Bombadil, what be you a thinking? Peeping inside my tree, watching me a drinking, deep in my wooden house, tickling me with feather, dripping wet down my face like a rainy weather. You let me out again, old man Willow. I'm stiff lying here. There's no sort of pillow. Your hard, crooked roots, I drink your river water. Go back to sleep again like the river daughter. Willow man let him loose when he heard him speaking, locked fast his wooden house, muttering and creaking, whispering inside the tree, out from Willow Dingle. Tom went walking on up the withy windle.
Under the forest eaves he sat a while, a-listening. On the boughs piping birds were chirruping and whistling. Butterflies about his head went quivering and winking, until grey clouds came up as the sun was sinking. Then Tom hurried on. Rain began to shiver, round rings spattering in the running river. A wind blew, shaken leaves, chilly drops were dripping. Into a sheltering hole old Tom went skipping. Out came Badger Brock with his snowy forehead and his dark blinking eyes. In the hill he quarried with his wife and many sons. By the coat they caught him, pulled him inside their earth, down their tunnels brought him. Inside their secret house there they sat a-mumbling, "Ho, Tom Bombadil, where have you come tumbling? Bursting in the front door, badger folk have caught you. You'll never find it out, the way that we have brought you." "Now, old Badger Brock, do you hear me talking? You show me out at once, I must be a-walking. Show me to your back door under briar roses, then clean grimy paws, wipe your earthy noses. Go back to sleep again on your straw pillow, like fair Goldberry and old man Willow." Then all the badger folk said, "We beg your pardon." They showed Tom out again to their thorny garden, went back and hid themselves, a-shivering and a-shaking, blocked up all their doors, earth together raking.
Rain had passed, the sky was clear, and in the summer gloaming, old Tom Bombadil laughed as he came homing, unlocked his door again, and opened up a shutter. In the kitchen round the lamp moths began to flutter. Tom through the window saw waking stars come winking, and the new slender moon early westward sinking. Dark came under hill, Tom he lit a candle, upstairs creaking went, turned the door handle. "Ho, Tom Bombadil, look what night has brought you. I'm here behind the door, now at last I've caught you. You'd forgotten Barrow White, dwelling in the old mound, up there on hilltop with the ring of stones round. He is got loose again, under earth he'll take you. Poor Tom Bombadil, pale and cold he'll make you. Go out, shut the door, and never come back after. Take away gleaming eyes, take your hollow laughter. Go back to grassy mound on your stony pillow. Lay down your bony head like old man Willow, like young Goldberry and badger folk in burrow. Go back to buried gold and forgotten shadow. Out fled Barrow White through the window leaping, through the yard, over wall, like a shadow sweeping. Uphill wailing went, back to leaning stone rings, back under lonely mound, rattling his bone rings.
Old Tom Bombadil lay upon his pillow, sweeter than Goldberry, quieter than the willow, snugger than the badger folk or the barrow dwellers, slept like a humming top, snored like a bellows. He woke in morning light, whistled like a starling, sang, "Come, merry doll, my darling." He clapped on his battered hat, boots and coat and feather, opened the window wide to the sunny weather. Wise old Bombadil, he was a wary fellow, bright blue his jacket was, and his boots were yellow. None ever caught old Tom in upland or in dingle, walking the forest paths or by the withy windle, or out on the lily pools in boat upon the water, but one day Tom he went and caught the river daughter, in green gown, flowing hair, sitting in the rushes, singing old water songs to birds upon the bushes. He caught her, held her fast. Water rats went scuttering. Gonna share a photo here. He caught her, held her fast. Water rats went scuttering. Reeds hissed, herons cried, and her heart was fluttering. Said Tom Bombadil, "Here's my pretty maiden. You shall come home with me. The table is all laden. Yellow cream, honeycomb, white bread and butter. Roses at the window sill and peeping round the shutter. You shall come under hill. Never mind your mother. In her deep weedy pool, there you'll find no lover."
Old Tom Bombadil had a merry wedding, crowned all with buttercups, hat and feather shedding. His bride with forget-me-nots and flag lilies for garland was robed all in silver green. He sang like a starling, hummed like a honey bee, lilted to the fiddle, clasping his river maid round her slender middle. Lamps gleamed within his house, and white was the bedding. In the bright honeymoon, badger folk came treading, danced down under hill, and old man Willow tapped at window pane as they slept on pillow. I love that part. On the bank in the reeds, river woman sighing, heard old Barrow White in his mound crying. Old Tom Bombadil heeded not the voices, taps, knocks, dancing feet, all the nightly noises, slept till the sun arose, then sang like a starling, "Hey come Derry doll, merry doll, my darling," sitting on the doorstep, chopping sticks of willow, while fair Goldberry combed her tresses yellow.
So, that's that then. What you have just heard is Tom Bombadil's actual backstory, at least according to Hobbit lore. And that's not my caveat. It's present in Tolkien's own preface to the poem. He says, "This poem and Bombadil Goes Boating evidently come from the Buckland. They show more knowledge of that country and of the Dingle, the wooded valley of the Withywindle, than any hobbits west of the Marish were likely to possess. They also show that the Bucklanders knew Bombadil, though no doubt they had as little understanding of his powers as the Shirefolk had of Gandalf's. Both were regarded as benevolent persons, mysterious maybe and unpredictable, but nonetheless comic." Number one, this one, is the earlier piece and is made up of various Hobbit versions of legends concerning Bombadil. So, we will see what we conclude about him as we go. So with that, let's get into actually reading some bits from this chapter. But before we do that, Rob, what are your reflections? What are your thoughts about this poem?
I love it. It's so much fun to read, and it's easy to read too. Not every poet is easy to read. I'm looking at you, Robert Browning. Um, but it's delightful. And in terms of what we're getting at today, I think it's interesting. I think it's very interesting. I don't know what to make of it yet. That we begin. Old Tom Bombadil was a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket was, and his boots were yellow. Um, and maybe this has to do with the fact that this is Hobbit lore, right? If I'm going to read into it a little bit, right? This frame device that Tolkien gives us, where the stories of old Tom belong to the past, right? Belong to tales you tell your children, but aren't really real. Now this isn't a thing. But of course, we're gonna see Tom have other thoughts on that coming up. Uh, but I mean, I love it. I love how at each of his encounters, he compares this adversary to the last several adversaries and keeps building on that. I love the idea of Old Man Willow, just to annoy Tom, just tapping at the window like some sort of some sort of neighborhood scamp. Oh, it's great. It's great stuff.
Yeah, I'm also intrigued by the past tense. It feels like kind of a nursery rhyme. These are our stories. They're not really real, but it's stories about out there on the other side of the old forest. Um, uh, what I think is really interesting is, on the one hand, when we actually encounter Tom and Goldberry in the text, uh, the characterizations are completely different from what we see here in the poem, and yet they bring in the poetry, and all of the elements are present in the story. So you can almost believe it's like a nursery rhymization, if I can coin a word, a nursery ramification of real encounters with this strange pair living out at the headwaters of the river. Um, but mixing and muddling the details of the story, perhaps. But which parts are mixed and muddled and which are real? Well, it's tough to pick them out. It's especially because Tom leans into it and embraces it. Um, the other thing I gotta say is, it's been a few years since I read it from the Kalevala, but this does really, resonate with the kind of stuff you see Vainamoinen doing, going on adventures, having sort of these mythic encounters with different entities that are trying to seize him or defeat him, and kind of making a fairly playful mockery of them, as I remember. So seeing how it begins maybe and how it develops is a lot of fun. So.
If you haven't read the Kalevala, listeners, you should.
Mhm.
Even if you get no farther than Vainamoinen's sing-off, I can't remember the character.
Oh, right, right,
He
right.
does.
The
Yeah,
wizard,
it's
the wizard duel
the
as a
wizard
yeah.
duel. Yeah, it's a duel in song, and it's something else. Yeah, I want to comment on something you said though.
Hmm.
I'm not so sure that this is a completely different characterization. I feel like um this is very this is very this seems to be consistent with who we see. They're playful, right? And 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 I think that's something that's important to keep in mind when we're reading this, especially as people were who've grown up, as it were, with the films that had a much more serious tone, right? I enjoy the Peter Jackson films, the Lord of the Rings films anyway, not the Hobbit films so much, but the Lord of the Rings films, and they the one of the things I think they miss, and it becomes really apparent actually in the Hobbit films, is a sense of mirth, right? And I think mirth abounds if you pay attention to it in this chapter and whenever we talk about Old Tom. And I think also it's important. Tom has his own characterization of himself that we are going to read in a minute. Um, but we got an introduction here. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. Um, this is how Tom describes himself, and this is essentially the introduction here, and I think it's important.
I agree. I should clarify when I say I don't recognize the characters. Really, what I mean is I don't recognize Goldberry. Goldberry, as she
Oh, yeah,
shows
sure.
up in this poem, is kind of
Mhm.
a playful water sprite. Goldberry, as she shows up in the story, is this elegant, gentle, you know, light but very high goddess. I mean it's a dangerous word to say because people think, oh, a goddess, statuesque or but there's she's more than elven fair, and I don't see any playfulness about her except for a little bit of intellectual playfulness in her wordplay with Frodo. But we'll see that as we go on. But yeah, I do agree. Tom's characterization is pretty spot on. Yeah. All right. We're going to keep drawing conclusions as we go, but let's actually get into the chapter. I think I was surprised, and I think we will be again, how many elements from the poem carry through almost unchanged or just slightly altered. But to begin, we do actually need to go back to the end of the prior chapter as they approach Tom's house. So, Rob, would you read this first excerpt from the final pages of The Old Forest?
Certainly. Tom Bombadil burst out laughing. "Well, my little fellows," said he, stooping so that he peered into their faces, "you shall come home with me. The table is all laden with yellow cream, honeycomb, and white bread and butter. Goldberry is waiting. Time enough for questions around the supper table. You follow after me, quick as you are able." With that he picked up his lilies, and then, with a beckoning wave of his hand, went hopping and dancing along the path eastward, still singing loudly and nonsensically. Too surprised and too relieved to talk, the hobbits followed after him as fast as they could. But that was not fast enough. Tom soon disappeared in front of them, and the noise of his singing got fainter and further away. Suddenly his voice came floating back to them in a loud halloo. Hop along, my little friends, up the Withywindle. Tom's going on ahead, candles for to kindle. Down west sinks the sun, soon you will be groping. When the night shadows fall, then the door will open. Out of the window panes light will twinkle yellow. Fear no alder black, heed no hoary willow. Fear neither root nor bough, Tom goes on before you. Hey now, Mary doll, we'll be waiting for you.
So he literally goes ahead and prepares a place for them. I don't have much truck with the Christological identities, but I am struck with that. There is something resonant, something that rhymes there. I also really like how well, yeah, in context, this is immediately after he's whispered to Old Man Willow. Old Man Willow spews out, Merry and Pippin, and they bowing, say thank you, and that's what he bursts out laughing. Right? It happens so fast. There's no beating around the bush at all, and he invites them. He takes them under his protection, and then he leaves them. He doesn't like shepherd them along. He doesn't, listen to their woes and say, "Oh, they're there." He's just like, "Oh, well, that was a close shave. Off we go then. Come have dinner." And the table is all laid, and these are the words that the poem gives him as he's effectively making his somewhat forceful proposal to Goldberry. So I'm not quite sure what to make of that. Um, but it's interesting that where the pieces fit together.
I think there is, one of the things that is typical about Tom's verse is that it's very straightforward, right? I mean, it's in this sort of crazy meter, and it sounds a little ridiculous to modern ears, but it's very straightforward, and everything he says happens, right? So if we go with this idea that Tom is the master, Tom can go anywhere he chooses, right? But in singing this verse, he plots the path out for the hobbits, and he has perfect confidence that what he says will happen. The hobbits don't know yet, of course, that they should trust him in this, although he's given them a pretty good indicator already by saving their lives. But nonetheless, they've just met the guy. But I think I think the important thing here is not the stage blocking of Tom where he stands, but the poem,
Mm-hmm.
because the poem lays out exactly what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. He everything he says is poetry. To be fair,
Yep.
but everything he speaks comes true and is exactly right. Yeah, it's fascinating. And again, I really like it. We talked about this theme before, but I like how we see continuing with Tom uh, that sense of no one is going to carry the hobbit's burden for them. No one is going to
Mhm.
make their decisions for them. They have to do it themselves. Um, every time I read Tolkien, I get parenting advice. You know, I'm all used to trying to, push my kids through, do everything for them, make sure everything turns out all right, and Tolkien has no room for that. He's like, you do it yourself.
Yep.
So, all right. So then the sun does go down, like Tom says, and the path becomes very sinister again, like Tom said. But just as they run out of strength, like Tom said, they come to the edge of the forest and they see his house ahead of them. So would you read this bit as well, Rob?
Be delighted. The grass under their feet was smooth and short, as if it had been mown or shaven. The eaves of the forest behind were clipped and trim as a hedge. The path was now plain before them, well tended and bordered with stone. It wound up on to the top of a grassy knoll, now gray under the pale, starry night. And there, still high above them on a further slope, they saw the twinkling lights of a house. Down again the path went, and then up again, up a long, smooth hillside of turf, towards the light. Suddenly, a wide yellow beam flowed out brightly from a door that was opened. There was Tom Bombadil's house before them, up, down, under hill. Behind it, a steep shoulder of the land lay gray and bare, and beyond that, the dark shapes of the Barrow Downs stalked away into the eastern night. They all hurried forward, hobbits and ponies. Already half their weariness and all their fears had fallen from them. Hey come, merry doll, rolled out the song to greet them. Hey come, dairy doll, hop along, my hearties. Hobbits, ponies all, we are fond of parties. Now let the fun begin, let us sing together. Then another clear voice, as young and as ancient as spring, like the song of a glad water flowing down into the night from a bright morning in the hills, came falling like silver to meet them. Now let the song begin. Let us sing together of sun, stars, moon and mist, rain and cloudy weather, light on the budding leaf, dew on the feather, wind on the open hill, bells on the heather, reeds by the shady pool, lilies on the water, old Tom Bombadil and the river daughter. And with that song, the hobbits stood upon the threshold, and a golden light was all about them. I love that. I love it so much.
So it's perfect. And just the way he describes Goldberry, as young and ancient as spring, falling like silver, like glad water flowing down from a bright morning in the hills into the night. It's just the contrasts that are all brought together in that. It's heartbreakingly beautiful. What do you think about this, Rob? Besides what you already said, or
Yeah,
do you want to wait to give your thoughts until they actually step inside?
no, I mean it's fine. I want to just point out that they both. So I'm reading this as Tom reading the first bit and Goldberry singing the second bit. I shouldn't say reading, but singing, and they both sing. Let us sing together, and we're going to talk a little bit about ritual. We already have a little bit. Um, but I want to point that out that there is this call to enter into what's going on. And what I see happening here is not just that the hobbits are being invited into a shelter, but they're being invited into this song. And it, also think of the rain parting and the golden light and the parallels that has for when Frodo is approaching Elvenhome at the end of the story. And again, Mick, your vision of paradise, your Edenic paradise, is not that far off here, right? And this is clearly described as a paradise in the wilderness. So there's something there, Mick. Keep thinking about it. I do also want to point out I've been very careful, and I think you have two, but if you are familiar with the Rob Inglis audio book, which I love, by the way, it's wonderful. Um, again, Dr. Olson got me thinking about this, so I can't take credit for it, but Rob Inglis tends to end that last syllable of each line with sort of this rising tone, right? And it works for sort of the song that he's singing. But I think it's better to read it with sort of a falling tone. And if you are listening to the Exploring the Lord of the Rings podcast, um, there is one listener who wrote who made an arrangement for these poetries, these poems rather, with this idea in mind of the falling tone at the end of the line. So it's worth checking out. Again, uh, can't plug it enough. It's so good.
Yeah, you talked about that before, and I've not really listened to the Rob Inglis, so I'm not familiar with what you're talking about. He sings them, right? He doesn't
Mhm, he
just
does.
right.
Yep.
But just thinking that the way that the way the poetry goes, it demands a fall. You get this very weird artificial, sing-songiness
Hmm.
that people seem to do reading poetry when they don't know how to read poetry. I That's a little judgmental of me, I guess. But no, I appreciate the way you read it as well. Ugh, so much to say. Um, oh, I just want to call attention. Tom Bombadil lives under hill, right? He lives
Oh
under hill.
yeah.
That's weird, and it's there in the poem, from 1934. And it's here again. It's not emphasized as much here. The hobbits don't comment on it at all. That, oh, he lives like a hobbit under, his house is under a hill. You know
But is it? I think we need to be careful there, right?
that's
Because it.
true. Maybe it's like on above the surface, but it's below the further hill.
I think it's
Um,
uncertain,
mm-hmm.
right? Because if we read, yeah, so thanks for bringing that up because I was wondering about that.
Because there are
There's
stairs in the house too, which is
there are stairs.
right.
Yeah, it says there, still high above them, on a further slope, they
Mm-hmm.
saw the twinkling lights of a house,
Right.
right? So it sounds like it's on a slope, like it's on
Mm-hmm.
a hill with this grassy knoll, which resonates weirdly for American readers in the 21st century. Um,
I think a
and
more
then
substantial grassy knoll than that, but
yes, but then but you're right. But then it says there was Tom's house before them, up, down, under hill.
yeah,
I think you could say it's in the hill, but I think you could just as easily say it's on the hill. And as in many things, when I see a tension in story, I tend to embrace them both as uncertain.
yes,
As with the character of who or what is Tom, but I see this as uncertain, and that uncertainty to me is not at all discordant with sort of what they're about to experience
sure,
in the chapter.
yeah.
But I think you're right.
All right, let's see. Okay, so after this, we finally, after an hour and a half, are going to get to chapter 7 as the hobbits cross the threshold. And I have to apologize and maybe even plead with the Tolkien estate not to be mad because I have pretty much selected the entirety of the first 4 or 5 pages because I don't think any of it is anything other than vitally important, not to mention beautiful. I couldn't pick anything to cut out. We will, however, pause several times as we discuss it, so we're adding our own content to each piece. So I think that falls under fair use. So I'll start with their entry. So the 4 hobbits stepped over the wide stone threshold and stood still, blinking. They were in a long, low room filled with the light of lamps swinging from the beams of the roof, and on the table of dark polished wood stood many candles, tall and yellow, burning brightly. In a chair at the far side of the room, facing the outer door, sat a woman. Her long yellow hair rippled down her shoulders. Her gown was green, green as young reeds, shot with silver like beads of dew, and her belt was of gold, shaped like a chain of flag lilies set with the pale blue eyes of forget-me-nots. About her feet, in wide vessels of green and brown earthenware, white water lilies were floating, so that she seemed to be enthroned in the midst of a pool. "Enter, good guests," she said, and as she spoke they knew that it was her clear voice they had heard singing. They came a few timid steps further into the room, and began to bow low, feeling strangely surprised and awkward, like folk that, knocking at a cottage door to beg for a drink of water, have been answered by a fair young elf queen clad in living flowers. But before they could say anything, she sprang lightly up and over the lily bowls and ran laughing towards them, and as she ran her gown rustled softly like the wind in the flowering borders of a river. So I want to pause there, just before we see her say much at all, and just discuss the first impression that she gives. What strikes you in this, Rob?
I mean, this passage is. I was struck by this the very first time I read this. This image of uh, of Goldberry enthroned amidst the pools of water. Um, Clearly something is going on here. This is not how most people relax in their favorite chair, right? This is,
Yeah.
something's going on here, which brings me to this idea of a rite happening, right? They've been invited into this song, They don't know what they're going to experience, and this is the first image that they have once they're sort of past this whole being bathed in golden light. Um, the on the one hand, it's sort of magnificent. On the other hand, too, if you think of her like a flower, for example, like that one reader I mentioned
Right,
earlier,
right.
a river flower, like this makes sense, right? Like she's just it's kind of sitting there as a flower near the pools of water. But it's Tolkien as a lover of nature, I it seems completely consistent for him to elevate these little images into something magnificent like this. Um, uh, it's uh, it's great. I think also too about Goldberry's character. I do want to point out that when she leaves her pool,
She sprang lightly up
she sprang
and
lightly up, yep, and came laughing towards them, ran laughing towards them. So
yeah.
just to put a pin in that because I think there's more there. But this idea of the fair young elf queen, it's interesting that I think that Tolkien would put this here, and because they are going to meet an elf queen uh, in a bit, right? So this experience right now is completely new to them, right? It's being analogized as looking at a elf queen, although Galadriel is not young. Although Treebeard seems to think she's young, but Galadriel is not young by our count. Um, so when you and whatever guest you have, meet Galadriel in Lothlorien one of these days, it'd be interesting what kind of thoughts you have thinking back to Goldberry.
Yes, and I agree. I'm they're clearly in a completely different context than they've been any other time. This is different from when they're with Gildor's elves at Woodhall. This is and really that's the only experience that is remotely comparable. And we see that developed more by Tolkien as we move on. So actually, we'll just continue straight away. Would you read the next bit, Rob?
Certainly. "Come, dear folk," she said, taking Frodo by the hand, "laugh and be merry. I am Goldberry, daughter of the river." Then lightly she passed them, and closing the door, she turned her back to it, with her white arms spread out across it. "Let us shut out the night," she said, "for you are still afraid, perhaps, of mist and tree shadows and deep water and untamed things. Fear nothing, for tonight you are under the roof of Tom Bombadil." The hobbits looked at her in wonder, and she looked at each of them and smiled. "Fair Lady Goldberry," said Frodo at last, feeling his heart moved with a joy that he did not understand. He stood as he had at times stood enchanted by fair elven voices. But the spell that was now laid upon him was different. Less keen and lofty was the delight, but deeper and nearer to mortal heart, marvelous, and yet not strange. "Fair Lady Goldberry," he said again, "now the joy that was hidden in the songs we heard is made plain to me. O slender as a willow wand, O clearer than clear water, O reed by the living pool, fair river daughter, O springtime and summertime and spring again after, O wind on the waterfall and the leaves' laughter." Suddenly he stopped and stammered, overcome with surprise to hear himself saying such things. But Goldberry laughed. "Welcome," she said. "I had not heard that folk of the Shire were so sweet-tongued, but I see that you are an elf friend. The light in your eyes and the ring in your voice tells it. This is a merry meeting. Sit now and wait for the master of the house. He will not be long. He is tending your tired beasts." The hobbits sat down gladly in low rush-seated chairs, while Goldberry busied herself about the table, and their eyes followed her, for the slender grace of her movement filled them with quiet delight.
Right. So as we see her talking now for really the first time, she strikes me differently from what I would have expected just seeing her sitting there. At first, she seems like enthroned, static, untouchable, distant, and lofty. And then she runs lightly to them, and she doesn't just draw them in. She greets them even with physical contact. She takes Frodo by the hand, and then she moves past them, through them, and places herself between them and the door, not to prevent them leaving, but to shut out the outside. They are entered into a place of protection. And well, Tom is the master of the house. She is part of that protection as well. And Frodo, meanwhile, has this prophetic moment. He starts saying words he doesn't expect, and saying them in verse, in poetry. He's entering into the song himself now. Yeah. What about you, Rob? What jumps out to you here?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing, she runs to the door, closes it, turns around and sort of splays her arms across it,
Yeah.
right? Like, and again, I'm going to call out every single time that we get some sort of mirth,
Mm.
because I think it's important when we're reading Tolkien. It's something we can lose too easily.
Yeah.
Um, but this joy that Frodo feels doesn't come from nowhere, right? It comes from the people who've called him to enter into the song,
Yeah.
right? Goldberry and Tom are joyful, and that joy lands in Frodo's heart as well, and he's inspired to join the song, and sing. But again, they were invited. Let us sing together, and now here we are. We are singing all together. I mean, the other hobbits, not so much. Fair point. But Frodo representing Hobbit kind is
As the
it,
best of the Shire,
the
yes.
best of yes, the best of hobbits.
Yeah.
Yes, 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 of course.
The other thing I want to call attention to, just the description. He stood as he had at times, enchanted by fair elven voices, but the spell that was now laid on him was different. Less keen and lofty was the delight, still delight, but not keen, not lofty, but deeper and nearer to mortal heart. Marvelous and not yet strange. This is like one of our hymns in the church. We're contrasting opposites,
Yeah.
and there's an apophaticism to it, in bringing extremes together in one place.
I think there is a lot to meditate on in this idea that the joy of Tom and Goldberry is nearer to mortal heart
Mm-hmm.
than what we see in the elves, right? We know that the elves, if we're good students of the Silmarillion and all that adjacent literature, we know that the elves and men have, and of which hobbits are,
Yeah,
a species, um, have are kin of some sort, right? They're created differently, but they can even marry and whatnot,
they're
and
both children of Iluvatar.
they're both children of Iluvatar, right? And yet, the joy here is nearer to mortal heart, which of course the elves are not mortal.
Mm-hmm.
There's something different here, and we get no sense that Tom and Goldberry are mortal. It's quite the opposite. So why? And I don't know the answer, right?
Yeah.
But dear listener, why? Why is the song of Tom and Goldberry nearer to mortal heart than that of the elves? I think this is one of those moments where you can just sort of sit and think about it for a few hours if you have time.
Yeah, and I have my own conclusions, and it's not just about Aule, again, because this is like the fundamental theme. Um, but the elves, for the most part, they are still in this mode of building and preserving and maintaining and keeping everything static,
Hmm.
eternal perfection and beauty, where what men, what the race of humans, is relentless and necessary renunciation, which nonetheless, at its best in its fulfillment, is accepted and submitted to in a perfect peace, right? And and it's not about Auli and Yavanna, but bear with me, because again, I never mind whether they actually are, but I think it's valuable, it's beautiful, it's worthwhile, having read in the House of Tom Bombadil, having seen these two together, to then go back and see the tension and the conflict in that Silmarillion chapter on Aule and Yavanna, because that also connects with the elves and the men. Because Aule is the one who teaches the elves to craft things, to make things, to build things, to love too much the works of their hands. He's also the master and teacher of Sauron before Sauron falls to Morgoth, because Sauron is later in that, right? But Aule is willing to learn, and he yearns so much to see the children of Iluvatar, to see the elves and the men, that he makes dwarves even before the elves show up, but he has to control them himself, or else they have no life in them. So he finally, Iluvatar calls him on the carpet, and he says, "I was wrong. I will destroy them." And then a scene that always brings tears to my eyes, as he raises his great hammer to crush the dwarves, he sees them shying away in fear, because Iluvatar has granted them life in themselves and granted them some piece of that free will of the children of Iluvatar, which is the other thing. Like the Ainur, for all their great power, they're constrained within the music. And it is the children of Iluvatar, and especially men, who have actual freedom to really subcreate and go beyond what is ordained in the music, right, within the legendarium. And again, never mind who or what Tom Bombadil is, but as we see Tom and Goldberry interacting with the hobbits here, inviting them to sing, raising up their voices, giving them shelter and comfort and protection, but ultimately, frankly, just equipping them and sending them on outside of the constraints that Tom and Goldberry have accepted, because the task of facing the brokenness, the marring of Arda, belongs not to the great, not even to Tom and Goldberry, whoever they are, but it belongs to the hobbits. I think that this all relates to what you're talking about. Why it would be that there's a connection between Tom and Goldberry, deeper and nearer to mortal heart, because they're, whatever they are, whoever they are, they're mature, they're constrained, they're not trying to dominate anything else, and that humility brings freedom and joy and beauty that is unlooked for and maybe even unknown to the elves. Sorry, I went off there, but
That's okay. Those wonderful thoughts. Wonderful thoughts. And those of you who are not watching on YouTube, Father Anthony got visibly excited during that whole speech. It's a treat. So you should go back and watch it on YouTube, because it's so much fun being able to talk about Lord of the Rings and getting to talk to people who love it, right? And this is the joy of having a podcast like this, folks. So
it's such a gift to be able to do this.
yeah.
So, all right. So I talked too much, but I'll continue now with Tom Bombadil's return to the scene. So, from somewhere behind the house came the sound of singing. Every now and again they caught, among many a derry doll and a merry doll and a ring-a-ding-dillo, the repeated words, "Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow, bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow." "Fair lady," said Frodo again after a while, "tell me, if my asking does not seem foolish, who is Tom Bombadil?" "He is," said Goldberry, staying her swift movements and smiling. Frodo looked at her questioningly. "He is, as you have seen him," she said in answer to his look. "He is the master of wood, water, and hill." "Then all this strange land belongs to him?" "No, indeed," she answered, and her smile faded. "That would indeed be a burden," she added in a low voice, as if to herself. "The trees and the grasses and all things growing or living in the land belong each to themselves. Tom Bombadil is the master, No one has ever caught old Tom walking in the forest, wading in the water, leaping on the hilltops under light and shadow. He has no fear. Tom Bombadil is master. A door opened, and in came Tom Bombadil. He had now no hat, and his thick brown hair was crowned with autumn leaves. He laughed, and going to Goldberry, took her hand. "Here's my pretty lady," he said, bowing to the hobbits. "Here's my Goldberry, clothed all in silver green, with flowers in her girdle. Is the table laden? I see yellow cream and honeycomb and white bread and butter, milk, cheese, and green herbs, and ripe berries gathered. Is that enough for us? Is the supper ready?" "It is," said Goldberry, "but the guests, perhaps, are not." Tom clapped his hands and cried, "Tom, Tom, your guests are tired, and you had near forgotten. Come now, my merry friends, and Tom will refresh you. You shall clean grimy hands and wash your weary faces, cast off your muddy cloaks, and comb out your tangles." So I made a point to read that line of Goldberry's as you had suggested, and I think you're absolutely right, Rob. But I hope you'll forgive me for stealing that passage. What jumps out to you in all this, Rob?
So I think it's important that um, Tom's self-description is repeated, right? And the narrator calls attention to this. Old Tom Bombadil is a merry fellow. Bright blue his jacket is, and his boots are yellow. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're not sure who Tom Bombadil is, remember these two lines, right? And that's pretty much all you need, in my humble opinion, right? But Tom is, like I've said before, in all of his verse, he's very straightforward. There's nothing obscure. And and I think Tom is telling us essentially everything we need to know about him.
Yeah.
He is a merry fellow. He's as merry as his jacket is blue and his boots are yellow,
Huh?
right? Um, and so I think it's no accident that this comes right before Frodo's question to Goldberry. Fair lady, tell me if my asking does not seem foolish. Who is Tom Bombadil? And I've got to ask, if his answer did seem foolish, is Goldberry the kind of person who wouldn't answer his question anyway? I think Goldberry would answer, even if he thought he was being foolish. But yeah, so Father Anthony, you and I talked about this, the he is thing, and the the sort of the ramifications that has had for a certain billion-dollar plus production of Tolkien related material on Amazon.
Yeah, to be filed forever under how to waste $1 billion
Oh
in,
my
you
gosh.
know,
Yeah.
in the
Yep.
saddest way ever. Anyway,
Yes. Yes. But I think it's worth saying that for us religious types, especially Christians, it's really easy to take the first person pronoun and the to be verb, I am, right, from the Torah, right, God's proclamation of himself, right, and read that in here, especially if we are prone to read the Lord of the Rings in a more serious register
yeah.
than is maybe warranted. And so I suggested, Father Anthony, that instead of reading it, he is, or he
Or
he
he
is,
he
right?
is.
He is, right?
Yeah.
To say, he asked, "Who's Tom Bombadil?" And she says, "He is." Like, this isn't
Aren't you
confusing.
listening?
Yes, right? And because I think I personally don't think, with all due respect to people who spend so much time and energy trying to create something, I would disagree with the suggestion that Tom is Eru. I don't think there's enough evidence for it, and it doesn't feel to me like the kind of thing Tolkien would be particularly interested um, in inserting into his work. And and especially sort of thinking of Tom and Goldberry as playful, although Goldberry is as you said, Father, more um, elegant and certainly more practical. We see at the end, maybe the guests aren't ready. Um, I can certainly see her playing with Frodo a little bit, and
Hmm.
I mean, it's saying her swift movements and smiling. She knows what she's saying, or he is. But if you, dear listener, want to read He Is, go right ahead. Have fun. Have fun. I won't judge you too much.
Too much. I think that you're right on, and I listened again to this podcast's first foray into Tom Bombadil, which was back in episode 10 with Michael Haldas, and realized he had made the same point then, and that really is a worthwhile episode. What I'm really intrigued by is what Goldberry does tell Frodo is, as you've kind of been suggesting, throughout, stop worrying about, you say, who is he, by which you mean, what is he, what is his history, what is his backstory, what is his categorization, what is his scientific classification, and she says, you've met him, you've seen him, he is Tom Bombadil. Why are you asking who he is? He's Tom Bombadil, right? He's the master. And then, she gives Frodo a master class, in his misunderstanding of what mastery means, because he says, "Oh, this strange land belongs to him," and I find the description here very enigmatic, very challenging even. Why is she troubled by that? She's playful, she's laughing, she's entirely at peace. And then at the suggestion of the land belonging to him, her smile fades. She has her sotto voce, almost speaking to herself. That would indeed be a burden, right? There's a history to this, and again, this is where I read again from the early chapters of Silmarillion and think, okay, I can see a connection there, and it's a beautiful connection, perhaps, of those who have had all the mastery and fought and struggled and seen it all go vain, stopping the struggle. And again, never mind trying to make any particular identity. Deacon Seraphim had a reflection, I feel like somewhere in the 50s or 60s, talking about, did the Valar do the right thing in bringing the elves to Valinor, right? They wanted to protect them. They wanted to preserve them. They wanted to keep them safe. But the elves are children of Ilúvatar, and perhaps they're actually intended to be there and to engage in the struggle. And the Valar, in making that decision, fundamentally, shift the direction of and the destiny of the elves in a certain sense. It raises other questions. Were there supposed to be only the three great unions between elves and men that we see in the Legendarium, or were they supposed to exist as two kindreds, often united in marriage, supporting and strengthening one another? And what the elves learned from the Valar was great craft and mastery, but maybe they learned the wrong lesson, because we see them having to unlearn it all through the long passage of the years. Love not too well the works of your hands. Well, why do the elves love the works of their hands so much? Because they were brought to Valinor and taught to love the works of their hands by, Aule. You see why I keep on coming back to this, but never mind that. It's just, I don't need to draw the conclusion, because the theme is there. I'm not worrying about what is Tom Bombadil. Who he is, how he functions, is entirely in keeping with the fundamental themes of the of the Lord of the Rings, of the Silmarillions, of Tolkien's entire life, and life struggle with mastery and freedom and death and trust. Um, yeah, uh, but why is Goldberry troubled? Why does her smile fade? That would be a paper, a reflection I would very much like to read. Um,
Yeah, those are really good. I think those are really good connections you're making to Silmarillion. The first thing that came to my mind was I assume behind Frodo's response that all the strange lands belongs to him is some I human idea of power, right? Which would be foreign to Tom, right? I think a good example of another master is Aragorn, right? After he comes into his kingdom, right? He has mastery over the people of Gondor, but he doesn't exert his power in the way that Sauron obviously would, right? But I think that's a fairly obvious reading, and I like the way you brought in the the um, the story of the elves and their in this sense of um, mastery of their craft. That was really neat. Thanks.
no, yeah. Uh, all right. Let's see. So let's continue. Would you read the next section, Rob, as Tom takes him to the washroom?
Certainly. He opened the door, and they followed him down a short passage and round a sharp turn. They came to a low room with a sloping roof, a penthouse, it seemed, built onto the north end of the house. Its walls were of clean stone, but they were mostly covered with green hanging mats and yellow curtains. The floor was flagged and strewn with fresh green rushes. There were four deep mattresses, each piled with white blankets, laid on the floor along one side. Against the opposite wall was a long bench laden with wide earthenware basins, and beside it stood brown ewers filled with water, some cold, some steaming hot. There were soft green slippers set ready beside each bed. Before long, washed and refreshed, the hobbits were seated at the table, two on each side, while at either end sat Goldberry and the master. It was a long and merry meal, though the hobbits ate as only famished hobbits can eat. There was no lack. The drink in their drinking bowls seemed to be clear, cold water, yet it went to their hearts like wine and set free their voices. The guests became suddenly aware that they were singing merrily, as if it was easier and more natural than talking. At last, Tom and Goldberry arose and cleared the table swiftly. The guests were commanded to sit quiet, and were set in chairs, each with a footstool to his tired feet. There was a fire in the wide hearth before them, and it was burning with a sweet smell, as if it were built of apple wood. When everything was set in order, all the lights in the room were put out except one lamp and a pair of candles at each end of the chimney shelf. Then Goldberry came and stood before them. Holding a candle, she wished them each a good night and deep sleep. "Have peace now," she said, "until the morning. Heed no nightly noises, for nothing passes door and window here save moonlight and starlight, and wind off the hilltop. Good night." She passed out of the room with a glimmer and a rustle. The sound of her footsteps was like a stream falling gently away downhill over cold stones in the quiet of night.
So I don't think we've ever read so much of the book at once. I just couldn't pick any part to leave out. This is where I'm saying, again, if anyone were trying to write a scene where mortals enter into the house of the gods, but not the gods as dominating personalities who seek to abuse and inspire fear and submission in humanity, but shepherds and servants, placed in charge of them to nurture them. You could not depict this more perfectly than what we see here of Tom and Goldberry. I don't know if that's what Tolkien is intending, but I couldn't do better than this if that were what I was intending. Uh, this whole sequence just it sets a tone that is inimitable, is beautiful. I I don't know if I feel equal to trying to pick what is and isn't important. What do you think, Rob?
You raise a really interesting point, and I wonder. Let's call them the gods for a moment. Where where is Tolkien pulling inspiration from to represent the hospitality of the gods this way? And there may be something out there, right? I don't know. Is it from literature? Is it his own experience with faith and the church and saints? I don't know, right? But you're right. Like I think we living in the West, we tend to associate the gods with this sort of distant majesty, right? Like a Roman emperor, especially like Diocletian, distant and um, forcing his will upon people. This is this is entirely different, right? These are people of great beauty and you know latent power who are serving these wayfarers. It's amazing. Like, where do these mattresses and these slippers come from? It's like these things have been set aside for them for eons, right? Waiting for them to arrive. And you might think too, like, didn't really need slippers. What they need is, 3 hots and a cot, right? Like, that they just need to stay warm and dry, right? But even, like, these simple little comforts are being tended to, and someone whose view of the gods is such that they can behave like this to mortals is someone who I think is a better Christian than myself.
Mm-hmm. All that's missing is they don't actually wash the hobbits' feet,
Yes,
you know.
it's true. It's true,
And
yeah.
yet this is still the image. They are rescued, they are brought into this house of these immeasurably powerful beings, and they are served, right? And that was one thing that struck me. Every time Goldberry is present in the room, she's described in in words of uh, again, heartrendingly beautiful, but entirely non-sexualized uh, adoration, veneration rather, of her womanhood, of her femininity. Every time she leaves the room, she's described in terms of the natural world, of a stream flowing, of the wind, always with water, water and wind, and she is existing in both spaces at once. And sometimes, sometimes it's brought together, like when she runs towards them at the very beginning. She's running lightly, but he describes the sound of her gown like the wind along a river. So the river imagery is all over the place with her. But yeah, myself, I think we need to note the heat no nightly noises, which repeats several times in the chapter and is very much from the poem. So it makes sense as having its genesis as a story Tolkien told his children about this doll that they had, as they're anxious about noises in the night, and assuring them, no, it's all right. Tom is master. No nightly noises need to trouble you. But then he brings it out and he makes it this. It's incredible.
Oh,
And yeah. Okay. Other thoughts? The hospitality is perfect. Uh, I like
the
how.
the guests were commanded to sit quiet.
Right.
That word stuck out. You know, Tom is master, right? Even of people who aren't his own
Right.
in his realm.
And yet
I mean,
his
it's not
mastery is, I'm doing the work. I'm caring
right.
for you. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Um, One thing I have to say, uh, the one piece again, Goldberry's characterization in the poem Adventures of Tom Bombadil, I don't see a lot in common except for occasionally, the lightness. They're both very light characters, but otherwise, I think the Hobbit lore fails to articulate what's going on with her. And especially the idea that Tom seized her by force and took her away. He caught her like a fish. That can't actually be true. She is clearly and manifestly there of her own free will. She calls Tom master, but she is the one who shows power, who shows authority, who shows caretaking of the hobbits in almost every way.
And I think you're absolutely right. That point about him seizing her
Yeah.
is going to be directly contradicted in the next passage that you're going to read.
Yeah. All right. So I was going to move on and just summarize their conversation, but we can't. It is far too important and too beautiful. So uh, I'll read this, Rob, and then you can comment first. About Tom catching Goldberry by force, I do want to say it can't be true. So why is that element there in the poem? Was it just there from
Mm.
beforehand, and then Tolkien has to kind of retcon it afterwards? What's going on there? Anyway, we'll move on. I'll read this bit. So Tom sat on a while beside them in silence, while each of them tried to muster the courage to ask one of the many questions he had meant to ask at supper. Most of all, who are you anyway? Sleep gathered on their eyelids. At last Frodo spoke. Did you hear me calling, Master, or was it just chance that brought you at that moment? So Tom stirred like a man shaken out of a pleasant dream. Eh, what? Said he. Did I hear you calling? Nay, I did not hear. I was busy singing. Just chance brought me then, if chance you call it. It was no plan of mine, though I was waiting for you. We heard news of you and learned that you were wandering. We guessed you'd come ere long down to the water. All paths lead that way down to Withywindle. Old Grey Willow Man, he's a mighty singer, and it's hard for little folk to escape his cunning mazes. But Tom had an errand there that he dared not hinder. Tom nodded as if sleep was taking him again, but he went on in a soft singing voice. I had an errand there, gathering water lilies, green leaves and lilies white, to please my pretty lady, the last ere the year's end, to keep them from the winter, to flower by her pretty feet till the snows are melted. Each year at summer's end I go to find them for her, in a wide pool deep and clear far down Withywindle. There they open first in spring, and there they linger latest. By that pool long ago I found the river daughter, fair young Goldberry, sitting in the rushes. Sweet was her singing then, and her heart was beating. He opened his eyes and looked at them with a sudden glint of blue. And that proved well for you, for now I shall no longer go down deep again along the forest water, not while the year is old, nor shall I be passing Old Man Willow's house this side of springtime, not till the merry spring, when the river daughter dances down the withy path to bathe in the water. So I think this is maybe at the heart of your thinking about this chapter. And Rob, so what do you think of this?
I mean, again, it's lovely. So I, I, I am, I keep mentioning it, but I'm going to mention again this, the Exploring the Lord of the Rings,
Yep.
and they had a beautiful discussion on this first set of verse here that you read, and this last line, "Sweet was her singing then, and her heart was beating." Um, they start with the assumption that they are that Tom and Goldberry are essentially spirits, right? So what what they surmise, and I like this, was that Tom saying that her heart was beating was a way of saying that she took on this physical form
Mm-hmm.
to offer herself
Mm-hmm.
as a companion for him,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is, you know, if that's true, and I like to believe it is, right? I think it does contradict this idea that, Tom just sort of snatched her and, you know, and hit her over the head with the club and brought her home like some sort of caveman or something, right?
Yes.
Um, because I think there's and I think this idea of making oneself available for um, for a marriage relationship, for companionship, is um, is is consistent with with the way Tom and Goldberry uh, work together throughout the chapter, serving each other. Tom bringing lilies for Goldberry as sort of a stand-in for snow, right? Until the snows come, um, and I just think I think it's lovely. I also, backing up a little bit, this whole um, chance brought me there, if chance you call it. It reminds me strongly of the Gandalf's description of Bilbo finding the ring by chance.
Right.
Um,
I can say nothing more clearly than that you were meant to find the ring and not by its maker.
yeah,
Yeah.
and but it's this weird tension, right? This I don't think ever resolves. No, I didn't hear you calling, right? No, I wasn't coming there for you, but I was expecting you, and it just, sort of happened to work out. So like there's this weird tension between Tom expecting to encounter Frodo and also not really caring whether he does or not, it would seem, right? It's all bound up here. And again, I think it's consistent with Tom because his purpose is serving Goldberry, and it's in this purpose of serving Goldberry that he accomplishes the purpose of this non-chance that brought Frodo to him for rescuing, and I think um, for other things you mentioned, and you mentioned water a few times, and I bring it up now. One of the reasons why this chapter interests me so much is because of the use of water imagery throughout. And Father Anthony, you and I were talking about this, and I believe strongly that water is this sort of connective tissue in the mythology that connects the people of Middle Earth, specifically the free people, the elves and men and dwarves, with with Elvenhome. Right, there's the sea between them, so there's that literal connection in the sea. But we see time and again, strange things happening when Frodo encounters bodies of water. I'm not going to go through all of them, but here, if you keep in mind that they entered Tom's house, passing through this curtain of rain, right, and here they are about to be surrounded by rain in Goldberry's washing day, and they've sort of entered into this sort of this space out of time, and they are going to soon hear the history of Middle Earth from the perspective of the gods. They're partaking in this ritual, this Earth seasonal ritual of sorts that we talked about. This is completely other and something that you would maybe expect to see more in a place like Valinor, and yet it's here, and Frodo is here experiencing it with him. There's a lot more I could go on and on about, but I did want to bring that up here because it's going to be important for some of the things we read later. But I thought I'd just bring that up now.
Yeah. I like your reflections. I'm finding myself intrigued by them. Um, like I really have to apologize about continuing to bring up this Aule thing. I cannot get away from it. Call it
It's okay.
a failure on my part, but um, but it may connect again, whether it's the whether it's who or what. But just I'm going to read from the Silmarillion because there are descriptions. Um, um, I shouldn't do this, but I'm going to do it anyway. It'll break up our reading from all the same thing. From the very beginning, when it's describing the roles of the Valar in Middle Earth, it talks about it's talking about how they don't ever really come to Middle Earth after they've created everything. So it says, from the beauty and bliss of Valinor, the Valar came seldom over the mountains to Middle Earth, but they gave to the land beyond the Pelori their care and their love. So that's Valinor. And in the midst of the blessed realm were the mansions of Aule, and there he labored long. For in the making of all things in that land he had the chief part, and he wrought there many beautiful and shapely works, both openly and in secret. Of him comes the lore and knowledge of the earth and of all things that it contains, whether the lore of those that make not, but seek only for the understanding of what is, or the lore of all craftsmen, the weaver, the shaper of wood, and the worker in metals, and the tiller and husbandman also, though these last, and all that deal with things that grow and bear fruit, must look also to the spouse of Aule, Yavanna Kementari. Aule it is who is named the friend of the Noldor, for of him they learn much in after days, and they are the most skilled of the elves, and so on, right? But then it talks about that Ulmo stays alone. He is always going back to Middle Earth with the water, right? He stays connected. But then it says, and it's fascinating, in that time of dark, Yavanna also was unwilling utterly to forsake the outer lands, for all things that grow are dear to her, and she mourned for the works that she had begun in Middle Earth, but Melkor had marred. Therefore, leaving the house of Aule and the flowering meads of Valinor, she would come at times and heal the hurts of Melkor. And returning, she would ever urge the Valar to that war with his evil dominion that they must surely wage ere the coming of the firstborn. And then it says Orome sometimes, comes as well. So, not saying it is, but saying I can't not think of it. Aule and Yavanna in Valinor, they have a really tense relationship. They're arguing about her trees and his dwarves are going to cut down her trees, and she asks for the Ents, and the Ents are there, and they're going to protect her trees. And the last line in of Aule and Yavanna, she says, Eru is bountiful. Now let thy children beware, for they shall walk a power in the forest whose wrath they will arouse at their peril. And Aule's response, nonetheless, they will have need of wood. And he went on with his smith work. So that's them long before the children of Iluvatar show up. But this is where I wonder, and I'm going to try to shut up about this, because it kind of fits. Yavanna, she cares not just about making things, about possessing things, about learning more craft. She cares about the growing things. And she goes back to tend to them, to heal, perhaps even to wash away the hurts of Arda there. Maybe one time Aule comes to regret, and he goes after her. And he finds her sitting by the pool singing, and her heart is beating. And he says, maybe I can lay aside domination. And this is his vow of poverty, to no longer try to dominate things, to no longer craft things, but to change and to spend all the long years of Arda under the domination of the children of Iluvatar, simply attending to his wife and to her things and caring for her trees and her flowers and serving her. And in that, finally, he gains a true mastery, not over everything else, but over himself. That's the beautiful thing that just is like, oh, maybe this is the rest of the story from what, because that's the end of their story, you know. Nonetheless, they will have need of wood. Right? And it tugs at my heartstrings in the same way as the first time I saw the icon of the Anastasy and saw the Lord reaching down and grabbing Adam and Eve and realized this is the actual end of the story of the fall. It's not that they are just cut off and condemned and cast out and then they die and that's it and they're gone, but there is a consolation on the other side. And it's too beautiful for words. It's too beautiful to say, this is how it must be. it's too beautiful to make it explicit, which I've of course gone and done in even just in a maybe sort of way. But I that I think is and I wasn't gonna say it, but you know, and her heart was beating. You're like, okay, that's that's a reason to lay aside all of this and just to abide and 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 care and nurture without mastering and dominating. I will shut up.
I
Anyway,
don't know. I don't know, Father Anthony. The more you say it, the more I like it. So,
okay.
it's. I think it's great.
Right. So let's continue. They go to sleep. We're going to finally stop reading everything. And all of them have their respective dreams. Frodo dreams of what's happening to Gandalf, and Pippin dreams of being trapped again in the willow. They both wake, and they're conscious of the safety of being inside Tom's house. So both of their dreams make sense to me. But Mary's dream is strange, as it doesn't overtly relate to anything we've seen so far. And it deals with water. So I'm hoping you have some insights, Rob. So would you read his dream and then tell what you
Yeah.
think?
Yeah. So it was the sound of water that Mary heard falling into his quiet sleep. Water streaming down gently and then spreading irresistibly all around the house into a dark, shoreless pool. It gurgled under the walls and was rising slowly but surely. I shall be drowned, he thought. It will find its way in, and then I shall drown. He felt that he was lying in a soft, slimy bog, and springing up, he set his foot on the corner of a cold, hard flagstone. Then he remembered where he was and lay down again. He seemed to hear, or remember hearing, nothing passes doors or windows save moonlight and starlight and the wind off the hilltop. A little breath of sweet air moved the curtain. He breathed deep and fell asleep again. As far as he could remember, Sam slept through the night in deep content, if logs are contented. Yeah. I'm not sure that Frodo's dream does make sense. Like it makes sense narratively, right? Like, oh yeah, this is Gandalf. He's being rescued by the eagles. But why? Why should Frodo have these prescient dreams, right? And so part of my theory with water is that um, Olmo in particular is speaking to the characters. Frodo in particular, but is speaking to the characters in some way that's sort of akin, not exactly like, but it's sort of akin to how he spoke to Tour, right? As Tour was off on his quest to find and rescue Gondolin,
Or
and
to
the
Boromir and to Faramir and
right, right. And so I think, yeah, that's a great point, right? That dream, um, right? And 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 so Frodo's, there's this, it's already you've already read it, but there's interesting passage where Frodo has this dream, and he hears the sound of the sea, which and it comments that he had often heard it in his dreams, though he had never seen the sea in his waking life, right? Which tells me that this is not just some weird psychological thing happening. Like there's some sort of divine communication happening. That's how I read this. And I think the other hobbits, especially in the House of Tom Bombadil, where the virtue of the gods is so rich, right? And the water is literally everywhere, right? It's in the pools and Goldberry's throne. It's in what they're drinking, which goes to their heart like wine. It's pouring over their or over their heads, right? So I think Mary is having some experience of that, but he's not. I don't think he's not. He's a great hobbit. He and I have some similarities, uh, but he's not the best of hobbits, right? And I just wonder, like, um, perhaps he's not. Perhaps his experience with a message from Olmo is going to be terrifying to him in a way that's not necessarily to Frodo, or at least not as sensible to him in a way that it would be to Frodo, right? We're experiencing the dream from Mary's perspective here, right? If it's true that Olmo is using the waters to communicate with them, and we could see it from Olmo's perspective. I wonder whether the dream wouldn't look different, right? But in scriptures, right, like, how do people respond to these visions of the Son of God,
Always with
right? I mean,
initially with fear, and then the response is fear not.
right, right. And so um there may be more going on here, but that's my initial take on this, and that Mary being um less accustomed to encounters with
Hmm.
Olmo is experiencing this in a frightful way.
Sure. I really like that reflection. It effectively is saying, there's a matter of spiritual maturity here. Frodo is older and more spiritually mature, the best of hobbits, and the message is intended for him. The vision in this liminal space. He sees clearly. Pippin, kind of the youngest and most foolish, has a nightmare about being in the willow again. Mary, a little bit more mature, is conscious of the water. And maybe this also is connected. He is from Buckland. He's the one who's not afraid of boats, of all the him and Frodo. And yet there's still that anxiety about it. And yet he hears too the fear not, and is able
Right.
to sleep. And then I'm not. I had thought that it was a positive characterization of Sam. He didn't have any dreams at all, but maybe Sam is just content. It certainly is painted as contentment, but also if there is a matter of perceptiveness and attention and maturity here, then is it saying something else about stolid, dependable, but not particularly attentive Sam? I'm not. That's interesting.
Yeah, or maybe I'm stretching a little bit here,
Mm,
but maybe Sam is just able to accept hospitality.
sure. Or
And
maybe his part is just he's with his master. His master is safe. That's
right,
it.
yeah.
So, all right, that is really helpful. I like that. Moving on. In the morning, they find it's raining, so they eat breakfast without their hosts, and then Tom returns. So I'll read this passage. Um, it's a long one, but you get a long one after, so I'm not hogging things. The upper wind settled in the west, and deeper and wetter clouds rolled up to spill their laden rain on the bare heads of the downs. Nothing could be seen all round the house but falling water. Frodo stood near the open door and watched the white chalky path turn into a little river of milk and go bubbling away down into the valley. Tom Bombadil came trotting round the corner of the house, waving his arms as if he was warding off the rain, and indeed, when he sprang over the threshold, he seemed quite dry, except for his boots. These he took off and put in the chimney corner. Then he sat in the largest chair and called the hobbits to gather round him. "This is Goldberry's washing day," he said, "and her autumn cleaning. Too wet for hobbit folk. Let them rest while they are able. It's a good day for long tales, for questions and for answers, so Tom will start the talking." He then told them many remarkable stories, sometimes half as if speaking to himself, sometimes looking at them suddenly with a bright blue eye under his deep brows. Often his voice would turn to song, and he would get out of his chair and dance about. He told them tales of bees and flowers, the ways of trees, and the strange creatures of the forest, about the evil things and good things, things friendly and things unfriendly, cruel things and kind things, and secrets hidden under brambles. The poetry's coming out even there. As they listened, they began to understand the lives of the forest, apart from themselves. Indeed, to feel themselves as the strangers where all other things were at home. Moving constantly in and out of his talk was Old Man Willow, and Frodo learned now enough to content him, indeed more than enough, for it was not comfortable lore. Tom's words laid bare the hearts of trees and their thoughts, which were often dark and strange, and filled with a hatred of things that go free upon the earth, gnawing, biting, breathing, breaking, hacking, burning, destroyers and usurpers. It was not called the Old Forest without reason, for it was indeed ancient, a survivor of a vast forgotten woods, and in it there lived yet, aging no quicker than the hills, the fathers of trees, remembering times when they were lords. The countless years had filled them with pride and rooted wisdom, and with malice. But none were more dangerous than the great willow. His heart was rotten, but his strength was green, and he was cunning, and a master of winds, and his song and thought ran through the woods on both sides of the river. His grey, thirsty spirit drew power out of the earth, and spread like fine root threads in the ground, and invisible twig fingers in the air, till it had under its dominion nearly all the trees of the forest, from the hedge to the downs. So I felt like I had to read that bit just because it closes the loop on my conversation last month with Mark Caldwell. And I think it nicely connects with our conclusions there about the forest as an entity unto itself. Although it does attribute maybe a rather darker mode of reflection, of not existence, but of thinking to the trees. Just they have reason for it. What do you think of this, Rob? And especially, what do you think of Goldberry's Washing Day?
First of all, Mark Caldwell, if you're listening, I loved the episode last month, and your thoughts on the Old Forest. So thank you for that. I there's so much going on here. So so we began with "Let us sing together," and Father Anthony, you noted as you were reading that the poetry continued in the prose, right? You weren't reading Tom's words, but you were reading poetically cast prose. And I think it's important that the song has not stopped, right? They 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 are in the song. It's my personal belief because of my pet theory that this song continues, right, all the way to the destruction of the ring and finds its culmination in the song that gets sung
Oh,
at the end,
that's beautiful.
right? And so this is Frodo and in particular, but Frodo and Sam and the other hobbits entering into this song that of Erendil, right? And his story.
Hmm.
So, but Tom is giving Frodo a perspective on the song that he's not going to get anywhere else, and that is the perspective of the earth. And the earth is, as Aragorn says, a mighty thing of legend, but it's not always a nice place, right? And uh, and so it's it would be disingenuous of Tom to only sing about the good things of trees, right? A true great story gives the 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 truth about its subjects, both the good and the bad. And these are stories that Frodo is going to bring with him to Mordor and redeem in the destruction of the ring, right? The story is not just of the trees, but of course the usurpers, right? Um, the hackers and that wonderful staccato evil behavior thing that he does. Um, he's gonna take that to Mordor and and redeem it, and bring it with him into Elvenhome. And if Frodo doesn't bring these elements of the song, these elements don't get redeemed.
And in a sense, it's part of maybe why it's necessary. Just for uh, the truth of the character of the individual and the truth of the story that Frodo fails at the cracks of doom. He is not able to lay it aside himself, having struggled to lay aside mastery all through the book. At the end, carrying that burden, he cannot lay it aside himself. Then he needs the help of a well, of one who is utterly mastered by desire and lust, for petty power, which then destroys itself. Uh, yeah, I really like that. I really like that. He has to carry it all with him. He brings the entire, all of Ardamard distilled into the ring and then distilled and carried in Frodo himself. Huh. That's a beautiful thought. All right. Uh, uh, Myself, I have a hard time just about Goldberry not reading this as the rain itself being Goldberry's washing. It doesn't tell us what she's washing otherwise. Or rather, when she comes back and talks about what's washed, it's not clothes, it's not the house, it's not herself. Um, and you know, so maybe she is just a nature spirit. She's the river daughter. She's in charge of the rain in this area. But uh, I, I, I feel like there's maybe more going on, and that piece from the Silmarillion, she would often go and heal the wounds of Ardamard. Comes back to me. At any rate, I'm really trying to stop beating this dead horse, and
I don't think it's a dead horse.
it's
The more
there.
you bring up, the more intrigued I become. So, yeah, by all means. But I think, um, that if this theory that you enjoy so much is true, to the point I made earlier about, asking, it is, is this pattern that I see helping to make sense of what I'm reading? I think that's a valid way of asking questions
Right.
about this.
It can't be okay. What is the power level of Tom and Ivana, and therefore can we just match their? It can't be this
Right.
mathematical. What category, what classification could they be? It has to actually match with who they are,
Mhm. Yep.
and therefore it will always be vague. It will never be definitive. Um, I like the connection, but regardless of who they are, if they are just themselves named as they are, or if there is, they are the culmination of a story that begins elsewhere. The theme, the truth, is absolutely, the same thing. Goldberry is washing, and cleansing, the old forest with the rainfall, it seems. So, leaving behind Goldberry and her washing day and what she's washing, leaving that to be enigmatic as Tolkien wishes. We'll skip this, but Tom continues. So he starts with like common things. The bees and the birds, and not the birds and the bees, but the bees and the birds, and and then he talks about the forest itself. And then he goes on by telling stories of the realms of men that had followed the forest and that had, chopped it down, although he doesn't say that explicitly, and all about all the things they had made and done and how they fell and how their tombs came to be inhabited by Barrow Wight. So he's moving back in time, or just maybe beyond the borders. But after that, he does go further back in time, and that really is necessary to read. So would you continue with this substantial bit, Rob?
Yeah. When they caught his words again, they found that he had now wandered into strange regions beyond their memory and beyond their waking thought, into times when the world was wider and the seas flowed straight to the western shore. And still on and back, Tom went singing out into ancient starlight when only the elf sires were awake. Then suddenly he stopped, and they saw that he nodded as if he was falling asleep. The hobbit sat still before him, enchanted, and it seemed as if, under the spell of his words, the wind had gone, and the clouds had dried up, and the day had been withdrawn, and darkness had come from east and west, and all the sky was filled with the light of white stars. Whether the morning and the evening of one day or many days had passed, Frodo could not tell. He did not feel either hungry or tired, only filled with wonder. The stars shone through the window, and the silence of the heavens seemed to be round him. He spoke at last out of his wonder and a sudden fear of that silence. "Who are you, master?" he asked. "Eh? What?" said Tom, sitting up, and his eyes glinting in the gloom. Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Tell me, who are you alone, yourself and nameless? But you are young and I am old, eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees. Tom remembers the first raindrop and the first acorn. He made paths before the big people and saw the little people arriving. He was here before the kings and the graves and the barrow wights. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already, before the seas were bent. He knew the dark under the stars when it was fearless, before the Dark Lord came from outside. The shadow seemed to pass by the window, and the hobbits glanced hastily through the panes. When they turned again, Goldberry stood in the door, behind, framed in the light. She held a candle, shielding its flame from the draught with her hand, and the light flowed through it, like sunlight through a white shell. The rain has ended, she said, and new waters are running downhill under the stars. Let us now laugh and be glad.
Okay, so I want to hear what you make of this, Rob. I'll just note briefly, this passage is one place where Tolkien made a change from the original draft. In the first version, Tom didn't say he was eldest; he said he was an aborigine. What that is,
Yes,
one who had been there from the beginning. It's just the straight Latin. I think eldest is better.
far better.
What do you think about this? About the whole passage? About the spell of Tom's words, bringing them back, with him to that quiet and silence under the stars.
One thing I noticed just as I was reading right now is then suddenly he stopped and they saw that he nodded as if he was sleeping. So this is something that Tolkien would know and that I don't think we're always very aware of. He doesn't say they saw that he nodded as if he were falling asleep. It says he was falling asleep. So he's not
Huh.
using the subjunctive
Right.
mood, right? Which if Tolkien had been using the subjunctive mood,
He would say
that
were.
would indicate
Yeah.
that Tom was not asleep. But because he's not using the subjunctive mood, we can say that he was falling asleep, which I just think, I think that narratively that's important to sort of how he's telling the tale. Um, and it's a fun little like grammatical detail that's easy to miss, but there's something there. So why does Tom stop and fall asleep there? He says he remembers the first acorn, the first drop of rain, which presumably happens before the elves arrive, right? Um, and so that's interesting. I don't know how to answer that yet, but I think it's I think it's interesting. Another observation I have, and this gets into what I mentioned before about Frodo and these, encountering bodies of water and considering that rain is falling on them all the time right now. Frodo experiences some lacuna here. He's lost track of time.
Yeah.
And he's not quite oriented. Um, it, it, I think this is just you know more of this conversation that he's having through the water with Ulmo. But I think also importantly in the story that Tom is telling, they are outside of time, right? It's if I had to guess at why Tom stops and falls asleep here, it's because history telling is is the is the work of elves and men. And elves and men didn't live. They were not created yet, right? Prior to this point. And so it makes sense that he would stop because Tom is giving a history. He's not saying because and we see later on because he sees this drop of water, the first drop of water and the first acorn, he's not saying that like he uh you know his existence is coeval with with the elves, right? But there's this this the the nature of the storytelling changes at this point. And I think too, I haven't scanned it, but I feel like the rhythm of Tom's speech changes in the paragraph beginning with a what?
Yeah.
I could be wrong. I could, like I said, I haven't scanned it to make sure, but just in reading it, like it doesn't feel like his normal cadence. And if that's so, I think that that maybe suggests that this theory that I've, in all honesty, just dreamed up right now, that he stops telling the story the way he had been telling it because this is when elves first appear, and so that the nature of how the story is told changes. I think it's consistent with that. But
Yeah, I like that because you're right. This it doesn't seem to be metered. It almost, a what? Don't you know my name yet? That's the only answer. Okay, that has kind of that, tell me who are you, alone, yourself, and nameless. But you are young and I am old. Eldest, that's what I am. Mark my words, my friends. Tom was here before the river and the trees, and that's gone. Tom remembers the first raindrop. So like, eldest, that's what I am. Poetry ends. Mark my words, my friends, is it seems all prose. When the elves passed westward, Tom was here already before the seas. There are like hints of it, but it's not there. I like your thought. I was even going to say the elves are the ones who invented language. We
sure,
don't have
yeah,
any sense that the song of the Ainur was a song with words. It was, in music and chords, but wordless. And that would then, there's almost a sense Tom sings because the children of Iluvatar sing. uh, and he's he sings in words because they invented language, and he is their servant. Even though he submits himself to their rule and mastery, or stewardship of Arda. He is not a fallen angel. He is faithful. Whatever he is, whatever his he is right, he is faithful, he is, and therefore there's that silence before of apparent timelessness, because who's there to experience time? I'm kind of just repeating what I'm hearing you say. I really like that reflection. uh that's that's beautiful. And and there is a space of time. So just as whatever's going on, there is a space of time between the creation of Arda, of the earth itself. Distinct from Ea, there's a space of time between the creation of Arda and the entrance of the Dark Lord into Arda. All the Ainur go into Ea, the world that is, together, and they forge different things, just remembering the Silmarillion. Uh, but the Valar are the ones specifically that go into Arda and fashion it as the dwelling place for the children of Iluvatar. And then Melkor, jealous, comes into it and begins to break things. Um, I mentioned that just because I've seen people troubled. What do you mean? How is there a before? All the Ainur came, all the Valar came into the creation at the same time, but there is that distinction
yeah.
between Ea at large and Arda as kind of the crown or the temple, of it. Um,
It's amazing too. What how that last line in that paragraph before the Dark Lord came from outside.
mm,
What would that have meant to someone reading this for the first time in 1954? Before we had the Silmarillion and it's just like there's it's like this tantalizing detail of this
right.
story we're not going to get.
Yeah.
Of course, now we have access to it, but
Everything.
yeah,
Presumably, they would have thought Sauron, you know,
yeah, right,
and yet this is a larger problem than Sauron has ever.
yep.
Yeah. Um, The other thing, the characterization of Goldberry, is she the shadow that passes by the window?
Yeah,
Or
I wonder. It would seem to suggest that, right?
right,
Or is it that this sort of psychic projection of the Dark Lord outside?
right.
Yeah,
But then when they turn again, that's when she's there. And the image of the candle shining through, it's not just like they can see a hint of the flame. The light flows through it. Tolkien and light. Like Tolkien and water. This is a huge theme. But sunlight through a white shell. I What a simile.
yeah.
I'm not sure what it means. Um, but
Yeah, well, I mean, it depends on the shell, but I think like of a clam shell, it tends to be sort of has this pink.
oh, right,
Yeah,
right. Just,
yeah,
just, just, just the literal, right? Okay.
yeah. I y- One of the things here, if we don't have time to do it, but if we were to back all the way up, right, to when she left the room,
Yes,
right, this is a parallel of how she left the room.
right.
She's coming
That's
in the
true.
same way.
That's true.
Yeah,
She left with a candle, but they didn't see her in the morning.
right.
They just, heard her singing above them. Uh, what does that mean above them? Upstairs?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I don't know.
I, I,
Huh.
I don't think we even read it, but it's this strange. Where is she? When she's not in the room, the language gets very slippery, like trying to
Yeah.
hold water in your fingers.
Oh, nice. I like that.
Yeah, she is, her heart is beating. She is incarnate, but is she entirely? Again, Tom is important, but Goldberry is the one who gets the Goldberry is the one who is elevated in this,
Right.
all through the chapter. It's so much more about her. All right, so we got to move on. After this, they have their second supper in the House of Tom Bombadil. It's a beautiful meal, but there's a note after that I found striking, and more so after what we just read. So I'll read this short little bit. After they had eaten, Goldberry sang many songs for them, songs that began merrily in the hills and fell softly down into silence. And in the silences, they saw in their minds pools and waters wider than any they had known, and looking into them, they saw the sky below them, and the stars like jewels in the depths. Then once more she wished them each good night, and left them by the fireside. Like, what is happening? Like, I thought just, oh, in the silences, they saw in their minds pools and waters. Okay, so she was singing about pools and waters, and they're imagining them. But then they go and look in the pools, and they see the sky. Like, this has been made real by her singing, in some sense. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, remembering ahead, right? This is the experience they have looking into the waters of Kheled Zaram,
right, right,
right? This is how this is how Galadriel connects to Gimli,
right.
right? Um, I don't know. I'm sure that when Tolkien was writing this, he wasn't thinking about how he was going to write those, right? Those passages in the future. But um, I think the parallel there is striking. And you're right. I had never noticed this before. This is weird. This is alien, right? They're in their minds. They've like and they're having this experience of looking down at these pools of water and seeing the skies above. That's wild.
And it almost is a mirror image of what you read of because also it's when Tom falls into silence that then they have this vision of, like, they're inside, and yet they're experiencing the whole vault of the heavens. At least that's the impression that's given,
Yeah.
with the stars shining down on them. And now Goldberry is singing, and they're looking down into the pools, and they're seeing that it's like the bookends. Both of them are inviting the hobbits into this experience of uh, of a grander vista and perspective than the hobbits are really capable of. But
Yeah.
that's a really puny way of saying something that's much grander. Um, and it's so beautiful. Like
Yeah.
it's heart-rendingly beautiful. Okay. Anything else about this from you?
No, thanks for calling my attention to that though. I'm gonna be pondering on that one for a while.
Yeah.
That's wild. Yeah.
All right. So I'm gonna sum this up a little bit. This is not the passage I thought we would skip in full, but after this, yeah, Tom starts asking them questions, and by his questions, he shows he knows about them as individuals and about their families, and he has dealings with Farmer Maggot and the elves. Uh, Now he tells them that he talks to Maggot because he talks about Maggot. And says, there's more to him than he seems. He sees well, and his feet are connected to the earth, and you know but about the elves, the way that's stated is interesting. It says it was also clear that Tom had dealings with the elves, and it seemed that in some fashion news had reached him from Gildor concerning the flight of Frodo. Now, that's all passive voice all the way along. So,
Hmm.
the narrator is very much hedging his bets. Does Tom actually say that, or is that just the Hobbit's conclusion? Um, but their conclusion is strange, considering that all of the elves that we actually see talk about Tom Bombadil seem rather more perplexed about him than anything else. And we see that when we get to the Council of Elrond, which I'm going to ask you to read pieces of because it's interesting. Elrond says he's forgotten about Bombadil, and the others barely know about him at all. Now, maybe Gildor is more important than he seems. I like that idea. My headcanon is that Gildor is actually Finrod Filigund's comeback, but probably not. Anyway, but it's strange. Bombadil has dealings with the elves, but is unknown to Elrond. Notably, he's not unknown to Gandalf, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, anyway, that passage is why we're going to skip ahead and read from the Council of Elrond. But finishing the scene, after questioning them, Tom asks to see the ring, which means he knows about it, and he even puts it on, but it doesn't make him invisible. And when Frodo puts the ring on himself, Bombadil can still see him, and then he tells him to take it off, saying, perhaps significantly, "Hey there!" cried Tom, glancing towards him with a most seeing look in his shining eyes. "Hey, come, Frodo there, where be you a-going? Old Tom Bombadil's not as blind as that yet. Take off your golden ring, your hand's more fair without it. Come back, leave your game and sit down beside me. We must talk a while more and think about the morning. Tom must teach the right road and keep your feet from wandering." So I feel like that whole poem is pregnant with significance. But before we move on, what do you think of this, Rob?
Yeah. Um, so when you and I were talking about this at the beginning, and you mentioned it sort of at the top of our discussion that I like to think of Tom as a phenomenological experience of the woods, right? And um, so I'm just going to run with that for just a moment, right? Y- you know, Here Frodo is experiencing Tom. This is Frodo's phenomenological experience as a person, right? And apparently Tom chooses to show himself to Maggot the same way. But there's no reason to assume that this is always how Tom is manifested, right? Or even Goldberry. And um, if the elves and if the elves have sort of forgotten about Tom, this is kind of consistent with sort of the way Treebeard talks about the elves not really communing with the trees anymore,
Right,
right?
right. They don't talk to them
And
anymore.
yeah, and so I would imagine that this passive voice, if my headcanon about Tom is right, if this passive voice reflects the fact that Tom's dealings with the elves are when they pass through his woods, right? Um, i- so it could be as simple as the elves are talking about the ring with Frodo in Woodhall, right? So they're surrounded by trees, right? And this message gets passed along through the trees. And Tom, as the master, as the spirit of the forest, he would know about that because this is a conversation that happens among trees, among specifically the trees that are in his domain. Even though these trees aren't specifically in the old forest, but I don't think his boundaries are that closely
Sure.
set. So
Uh,
that's a theory, an idea. I don't know, but
I think that makes sense. And really it means they think the elves, but the elves actually have nothing to do with it because Frodo doesn't confide in Gildor or any of the elves about the ring. But he does talk
oh, that's
about
a good
it
point.
with the other hobbits. The
Yeah, yeah,
trees would know about that. Um,
yeah. That's a good point.
yeah, that's fair. Um, or conversely, if Tom is more than meets the eye, not an Autobot, but um, but more than meets the eye and has something of the Ainur in him, then there too he's not constrained by the normal boundaries of space and time and what have you. Um, it's a really interesting feature that it has no power over him. And just by Peter Jackson's logic, that was the one reason, absolutely, that Tom Bombadil couldn't show up because Jackson felt that if anyone was shown to be immune to the power of the ring, then it destroys the story, which, well, I politely
Agree to
beg to differ.
disagree with him. Yeah.
Yes. Um, but I think it's worth, kind of wrapping up with the elves' reflections on who Tom Bombadil is and their conversation with Gandalf about it at the Council of Elrond. So at the Council of Elrond, Elrond says he'd forgotten about Bombadil, but Gandalf had not. Gandalf speaks with authority about Tom, and perhaps his words are something we should see. So Elrond, he just says Bombadil is a strange creature, and he wonders if he should have summoned him to the council, which is funny because Elrond elsewhere says, "You have come, although I did not summon you," and then he says he should have summoned him. So maybe Elrond's forgetting himself a little bit. But Gandalf replies as follows. So would you read this, Rob?
He would not have come, said Gandalf. Could we not still send messages to him and obtain his help? Asked Aristor. It seems that he has a power even over the ring. No, I should not put it so, said Gandalf. Say rather that the ring has no power over him. He is his own master, but he cannot alter the ring itself, nor break its power over others. And now he is withdrawn into a little land, within bounds that he has set, though no one can see them, waiting perhaps for a change of days, and he will not step beyond them. But within those bounds nothing seems to dismay him, said Aristor. Would he not take the ring and keep it there forever harmless? No, said Gandalf, not willingly. He might do so if all the free folk of the world begged him, but he would not understand the need. And if he were given the ring, he would soon forget it, or most likely throw it away. Such things have no hold on his mind. He would be a most unsafe guardian, and that alone is answer enough. But in any case, said Glorfindel, to send the ring to him would only postpone the day of evil. He is far away. He could not now take it back to him unguessed, unmarked by any spy. And even if we could, soon or late, the Lord of the Rings would learn of its hiding place and would bend all his power towards it. Could that power be defied by Bombadil alone? I think not. I think that in the end, if all else is conquered, Bombadil will fall, last as he was first, and then night will come. I know little of Iarwain, save the name, said Galdor, but Glorfindel I think is right. Power to defy our enemy is not in him, unless such power is in the earth itself, and yet we see that Sauron can torture and destroy the very hills.
Yeah. So I feel like this passage really indicates and highlights for us that we're dependent on our narrators and they aren't sure what they're talking about. And it's really interesting because we get, I feel, three or four different perspectives on who and what and how, who and what Tom Bombadil is, how he functions, from elves who, for all their wisdom, are thinking in those terms. And the elves don't get it, and Gandalf, I feel Gandalf isn't saying all that he knows here.
Right.
He's speaking to them in terms that they will understand. But so part of me is like, I have to defend my theory, even in this, which is, in a lot of its elements, a fairly strong refutation of the idea. But I think I'll back away from that and just say this passage really highlights the enigmaticness of Tom Bombadil. And Rob, I'll give you the final word before we wrap up with the chapter.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation that our narrators themselves don't really know. I think what's also important here though is the ring and what this tells us about what the ring does, right?
Mm-hmm.
People who put the ring on might think that they are hiding themselves, right? But what's actually happening is the ring is exercising some power over them.
Yeah.
And it the reason Bombadil doesn't turn invisible when he puts it on is because the ring cannot exercise any power over him. Its
Because he
power is
actually masters himself.
yes, and I think that is whatever whatever he might be from a taxonomy standpoint, right? Um, the important thing is that he is the master. He's mastered himself, and this ring has no power over him. And I think Glorfindel's um, insight probably probably true, right? He's gonna because it has no power over him. He's just not gonna think about it. He's gonna lose it because again, his Bombadil's purpose, right, is to serve Goldberry,
Yeah.
and the ring has no part in that.
Right. And, whatever the chance, whatever the intervention of Iluvatar that brought the hobbits, under his protection, that functioned in interaction with Tom's submission of himself to that to that one end, or not end, to that one task, that one value, I guess, that one thing to be attended to. He would not abandon that. He's not concerned about accomplishing a result. It's not his role to save Middle Earth from itself, to preserve it any longer. That is entrusted to other people. Um, and yeah, somewhere in that reality, he would not resist. He would not fight Sauron. More troubling for my pet theory is Gandalf's words. He would forget it or throw it away. That also doesn't really match with what Bombadil shows of himself. He's very attentive to the ring. He knows about it. He wants to see it. I wonder if Gandalf is being purposely misleading or purposely misled, or somewhat misled and ignorant himself. And it's striking that after everything is finished, as he then goes into retirement, at the very end of the book, he wants to go and consult with Bombadil before he takes the last ship. I said I would give you the last word, and then I didn't.
Well,
But
here you go. Even if Bombadil won't take the ring, do you think he might teach Gandalf more magic to fight Sauron? Maybe.
I think that, in all seriousness, Bombadil is helping Gandalf learn how to let go.
Yeah.
But all right, beautiful. Thank you so much, Rob. We were going to call that good for our big discussion. Now, uh, moving on to Act 4. After 3 hours and 18 minutes, oh my word, longest episode possibly ever. We've read a lot from the book already, but one of my favorite parts of this show is this section where we ask our guest hosts to read a selection of their own choice. I often hear things I'd never heard before from Tolkien's vast body of work, or am reminded of things I'd not read for many years, so I'm really looking forward to hearing what you have for us today, Rob.
Thank you so much. So I'm just going to find my passages. I've got two that I'm going to read. So thank you for uh, being generous with your listeners' time here. So just in keeping with this idea of the waters connecting us to Elvenhome and always remembering ahead to Elvenhome, I want to read two passages. One that's just my favorite poem in the entire uh, uh, set of Tolkien's poetry, which is a lot to begin with, and then one which I think will tie us directly back to the chapter we've been discussing. So the first is in the chapter "Farewell to Lorien," and I'm going to just sort of start just before the poem and end a little bit afterwards. Two elves, clad in white, steered it with black paddles, it being the boat that she's in. In the midst of the vessel sat Celeborn, and behind him stood Galadriel, tall and white. A circlet of golden flowers was in her hair, and in her hand she held a harp, and she sang. Sad and sweet was the sound of her voice in the cool air. I sang of leaves of gold, and leaves of gold there grew. Of wind I sang, a wind there came, and in the branches blew. Beyond the sun, beyond the moon, the foam was on the sea, and by the strand of Ilmarinen there grew a golden tree. Beneath the stars of Evereve in Eldamar it shone, in Eldamar beside the walls of elven Tirion. There long the golden leaves have grown upon the branching years, while here beyond the sundering seas now fall the elven tears. O Lorien, the winter comes, the bare and leafless day. The leaves are falling in the stream, the river flows away. O Lorien, too long have I dwelt upon this hither shore, and in a fading crown have twined the golden Eleanor. But if of ships I now should sing, what ship would come to me? What ship would bear me ever back across so wide a sea? Aragorn stayed his boat as the swan ship drew alongside. The lady ended her song and greeted them. We have come to bid our last farewell, she said, and to speed you with blessings from our land. And skipping down a bit, this is Frodo looking at her. She seemed no longer perilous or terrible, nor filled with hidden power. Already she seemed to him, as by men of later days elves still at times are seen, present and yet remote, a living vision of that which has already been left far behind by the flowing streams of time.
Hmm, that's beautiful.
I love this. Again, the water imagery, all that kind of stuff. Her um, that the poetry is I think incredible. The 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 way he weaves in her song of leaves and then the leaves uh, you know, decaying over time. I tried to read it, um, but if you're interested, listener, look up Adele McAllister on YouTube and her. rendition of her arrangement of this song, and she does a really good job of bringing out the uncertain note that this poem ends on. That's kind of hard to hear if you're not singing it or not reading it with a deliberate cadence,
Hmm.
um, because because Galadriel herself still doesn't yet know what's going to happen. She knows the choice that she has made to reject the ring and to become Galadriel.
Right.
Um, but she doesn't know where that's going to lead yet. She's hopeful, but
Mm.
uncertain. Okay, so that was that. Father Anthony, did you have any comments before I moved on to the next one?
Just thinking, Galadriel, for all that, Lorien is beautiful and lofty and peaceful and precious. I'm noting just lately the the problematicness of the Elven project, of Galadriel's project. It's a virtuous and a beautiful refuge from the ravages of time, but it's still unnatural. It's still refusing to submit, and her singing the song really is, showing not just her submission, not just her rejection of the ring, but her submission finally to the will of another, to lay aside her dominion, her mastery. I can say, Galadriel here is becoming more like Tom Bombadil. She's becoming the mistress of herself, even as she loses everything that she had spent thousands of years, uh, building and gaining and protecting and preserving. And it's stuff that you don't really realize is happening until you've read it, 10, 15 times, and all the backstory, and you realize, oh wow, this is heavy stuff. And for some reason, the line that almost is, grabbed at me the most is, that as she does that, Aragorn stays stays the boat, which, shows his perfect competence and mastery of the it's basically a canoe, but he stops. He holds on to honor this. He recognizes the moment, even if the hobbits don't. And it's strange to see the skillful wielding of a paddle, as an act of veneration and honor. But anyway, that's gorgeous.
My father-in-law, who loves to canoe, will
Yeah.
if he listens to this, I think he'll love the idea of using a canoe paddle as a object to
And
honor somebody. That's great. Um, yeah, man, I love that passage. There's so much there's so, yeah, I've got a lot of thoughts about those elven rings and what
mm.
they mean, but we don't have time, so I'm will
You'll,
move
we'll,
along.
we'll just have to bring you back again.
I'm ready. You let me know. All right, so here we are at the Grey Havens, right? And so in case you think Rob's theory about all this stuff connecting together is just a bunch of hooey, and dear listener, you are free to think that if you want to, but I just
But you're
submit.
wrong. But
You're
you're
wrong.
Yeah.
You're wrong. I'm submit as evidence.
Rob has a concordance,
I do. I have a concordance, man. You
and he
can't
knows
argue
how
with
to
a
use it.
concordance. That's right. That's right. This is almost at the very end of the book. Then Frodo kissed Merry, including the appendices, of course.
Right.
Don't want people to bring out the pitchforks. Then Frodo kissed Merry and Pippin, and last of all Sam, and went aboard. And the sails were drawn up, and the wind blew, and slowly the ship slipped away down the long grey firth. And the light of the glass of Galadriel that Frodo bore glimmered and was lost. And the ship went out into the high sea and passed into the west, until at last, on a night of rain, Frodo smelled a sweet fragrance on the air, and heard the sound of singing that came over the water. And then it seemed to him that as in his dream in the House of Bombadil, the grey rain curtain turned all to silver glass, and was rolled back, and he beheld the white shores, and beyond them a far green country under a swift sunrise.
Hmm. Where the water finally carries him home and brings him peace. Yeah. All right. That's gorgeous. Other people have read that passage before, but not, I think, with as much thought and meaning and significance. So, thank you, Rob.
Thank you.
Those moments are sublimely beautiful, and it's really been a pleasure to talk with you about them. But we can't always stay in the sublime moments, and now it's time for some mayhem instead. That's right. It's now time for a little segment that Father Andrew liked to call They're Taking the Hobbits to Isengard. Okay, Rob, now is the time when you get to play, for absolutely no prizes, a little game which will test whether you are a true Tolkien fan whom everyone should listen to, or whether we've just wasted 3.5 hours of everyone's time. I think you've already proven yourself, but this will be a different sort of test. The format is one that I inherited from my father and uncles. They used to play the trivia game this way when I was young. And if I recall correctly, you have some familiarity with this from your years teaching high school.
I do. I used to, not for Lord of the Rings, although I did do a Lord of the Rings unit once, but for many other works, I would test my students by giving them passages from the works we read, and they had to identify the antecedents to all the pronouns in the passages.
Oh, that's
And
brilliant.
so, what's that?
That's brilliant.
I didn't. There was my own idea. My own idea. I got it from a professor of mine in college, but um, I think if any of my students are listening, my former students from now 20 plus years ago are listening, right, and I do poorly, you can think of this as my act of repentance for troubling you with those brutally
Hmm.
difficult exams.
Magnificent. All right. So the game is this I will read a quote from Tolkien's works, and then you have to tell me who the speaker was. You can also earn bonus points if you can give the context, even if you miss the actual speaker, and those bonus points might just save us both because you will also ask me questions. I'll give you 3 passages and you can give me 2. So we need to get 3 total correct to survive, and context will gain us back half a point each for each piece of context. So, the rules for the quotations are as follows. It will be an actual quotation by an actual character. No narrator gotchas. It will be a full sentence or a sentence fragment if that's all that is quoted. And 3, it will only be taken from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings. I don't think I need to give you an example. We've done this enough times. And I think that's all the introductory stuff. So, are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right.
Maybe.
My category today for you, you're free to ask me whatever you want, but my category for you is enigmas and the scenes where we see them. Emphasis on the latter part.
Okay.
All right. Quote number 1. Need brooks no delay, yet late is better than never.
Need brooks no delay, yet late is better than never. Um, I'm going to. I don't know. I don't know. I'm going to go and say this is this is Gimli, and I think this has to do. This is in the Flotsam and Jetsam uh, chapter, um, but uh, I have a suspicion I'm wrong, but
Hmm.
it does sound like something that was said by or around Gimli. So,
It's a good guess. It's actually spoken by Gimli's arch nemesis and dual counterpart over the honor of the Lady Galadriel, which is to say, this is a line from Éomer.
oh man,
And it's the scene right before the ride of the Rohirrim. It's actually at the beginning of that chapter, where the chief of the wild men is helping the Rohirrim to reach Gondor. So
oh
I figure the wild men function as some rather enigmatic. So here, Gan Burit Gan has just left them, having led them around the orc rearguard at the siege of Minas Tirith by a forgotten Numenorian road through the mountains. So he has just departed when Theoden's scouts find dead the messengers of Gondor, killed as they tried to return from asking Rohan for help, bringing news that Rohan would come and help. So Theoden speaks first. He says, "Alas, then Denethor has heard no news of our riding and will despair of our coming." And Éomer replies, "Need brooks no delay, yet late is better than never. And mayhap in this time shall the old saw be proved truer than ever before, since men spoke with mouth." So,
I like it.
no points, but I really like the guess of Gimli because there's actually a lot of similarity between Gimli and Éomer.
That's good. It's
All
good
right,
stuff.
so now you ask me a question.
Okay, a lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk.
Okay. I think we're talking about Sam. And I think that the context is at Amon Sûl, when he's just recited the excerpt from the Lay of Gilgalad, and therefore I think the speaker is Frodo.
That's a noble guess, but incorrect, sadly.
Okay.
This is actually it's Mary talking about Farmer Maggot.
Oh, of course it is.
It's I did pick it. I tried to be a little challenging here. So
You
no
gotta
no
be. I'm
no
throwing
shade.
no freebies. So
Yeah, old Maggot is a shrewd fellow," said Mary. "A lot goes on behind his round face that does not come out in his talk. I've heard that he used to go into the old forest at one time, and he has a reputation of knowing a good many strange things. But you can at least tell us, Frodo, whether you think his guess is good or bad." So
so
this is the scene
it's
where they're
from
talking.
three's. No, it's from. Well, they're in the house in Crick Hollow, and
Right.
they're just about to tell Frodo that they already know about everything.
Yeah, it's a conspiracy
Yeah,
unmasked is the
yeah,
chapter. Yeah.
yeah. Alrighty. So now we have to either get some extra credit or we're just orc meat. So your next quote is this: "But you must be the guard and hold back the eyes."
Oh man. Hold back the eyes. That part's really throwing me because when I heard you say, "And you must be the guard," it instantly popped into my head like an answer, but then but now I'm completely lost. And hold back the eyes. Um, I'm gonna guess wildly here. I'm gonna go with my first guess, although I'm pretty sure it's wrong. It's Mary speaking to Baragond,
Hmm.
um, in his attempt to protect uh,
Protect Faramir.
Faramir
Yeah.
from Denethor's ill will. I know this is wrong, but that's what first popped in my head. But
Yeah, I thought you were going to get this right because you actually talked about close to this passage before, but this is Frodo speaking to Sam in Shelob's lair. It's the moment when he transfers over to him the phial
oh,
of
yeah, the
Galadriel.
eyes,
Right,
Shelob's eyes.
right,
Yeah,
right. So I'll read it. They've Shelob has run away from them before when they hold it up, but they haven't seen what it is. They just seen the eyes reflecting. But then they're almost at the exit. There's the web. Trapped in the end, said Sam bitterly, his anger rising again above weariness and despair. Gnats in a net! May the curse of Faramir bite that golem and bite him quick! That would not help us now, said Frodo. Come, let us see what Sting can do. It is an elven blade. There were webs of horror in the dark ravines of Beleriand where it was forged. But you must be the guard and hold back the eyes. Here, take the Starglass. Do not be afraid. Hold it up and watch.
It's great.
So, yeah, I had completely forgotten. I was looking for enigmas, right? So I was really struck by I was really struck by the mention of Beleriand. I had completely missed how much of the Silmarillion is in that chapter. So,
Oh, it's great.
all right. So,
We're orc meat.
well,
And
if we both get the next one right and we get the context, we're still okay. We've got a chance.
okay. But most importantly, my former students have a good reason to crow over me. This is fine. This is good. Okay. I'm going to tell you right now. This one's a trick one.
Okay.
Okay. Oft hope is born when all is forlorn.
Okay, because you said it's a trick, it doesn't quite fit. But I'm gonna go with it. My guess is that the speaker is Gimli, and that he's quoting Aragorn talking about the paths of the dead when they're at Minas Tirith and they're telling the story of what happened in retrospect.
You are so close. It is Legolas. Up with your beard, Durin's son, he said.
Oh,
He being Legolas. For thus it is spoken, oft hope is born when all is forlorn. But what hope he saw from afar he would not tell. When the night came, it did but deepen the darkness, and our hearts were hot, for away in the north we saw a red glow under the cloud, and Aragorn said, Minas Tirith is burning.
but it is at least from that from that retrospective.
Yeah, you're right. So
Yeah,
you got I think you've got the maybe the bonus point there, but
maybe, but
yeah.
yeah.
No, what's interesting is it is often spoken. I wonder who Legolas is quoting, right? Is this my first thought is like this is a dwarvish saying, but
Mm.
it can't be because Legolas doesn't spend a lot of time with the dwarves until he meets. Uh,
Although up with your beard, Durin's son, that
I
seems like
know,
a
right?
pretty good dwarven line. But
Yeah,
yeah, it could be an elven saying.
yeah.
Hmm. All right. Well, we may at least get some. I will count that bonus half point because you were kind and said maybe. Um, this one may be a little bit easier.
Okay.
So, for our final points, even if they don't save our lives, maybe our legs. Yeah, here's the final quote. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar.
There's a great deal. Can you read that again, please?
There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar.
Oh, so this is talking about Bilbo and Gollum,
Hmm.
I think, and their kinship. So I'm gonna say this is uh, this is Gandalf speaking.
That's right. Perfectly right. Yes, you have regained some honor for us. So this is right after, he's told the story of finding Gollum, and Frodo reacts and basically says, tells the story of how Gollum found the ring and killed Deagle and all that. I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion. It is true all the same, replied Gandalf. About their origins, at any rate, I know more than hobbits do themselves. And even Bilbo's story suggests the kinship. There was a great deal in the background of their minds and memories that was very similar. They understood one another remarkably well, very much better than a hobbit would understand, say, a dwarf, or an orc, or even an elf. So, all right. So I guess we got 2 points out of that. So I think maybe we lost our legs, but survived. All right. So, well, we've been at least looted and a quarter eaten by the Uruk-hai. Whether we needed our legs or not, we've not got them anymore. Good luck to us in Isengard. And that's all we've got for today. Thank you, Rob, for co-hosting the Amon Sûl podcast with me today. You are the first listener who submitted a request to come on as a guest co-host, and you have been a resounding success as far as I'm concerned. I found your conversation and your thinking absolutely delightful. I'm sure that the listeners will as well, and will find it well worth the 3 hours and 40 minutes that we're going to end up clocking here. So thank you.
Thank you. This has been such a pleasure. I never get to talk about this stuff at such length, and it was like the word you used is perfect. It's been a delight, and yeah, and I hope that the listeners can take this conversation away and have good conversations with their friends in coffee shops and homes and things like that too, because there's so much here to Tom and Goldberry, and they're part of the story, and it's worth many more hours of consideration.
Yeah. And especially since they've been omitted in almost every other adaptation, we need to give them their fair dues. So
That is right. And especially their fair due. No teaching Gandalf magic stuff, please.
no. Just no. So, next time on Amon Sûl, I will be joined by Amon Sûl's celebrity guest co-host, Michael Haldas, for what will I think be his 10th appearance on the podcast, as we follow the hobbits into peril on the Barrow Downs and continue our reflections on Tom Bombadil. Where you were very patient with my speculations about Tom and Aule, I am expecting Michael to smack me down appropriately and necessarily. I'm really super stoked to speak with him, though. His first episode on the podcast, that episode 10, is perhaps the episode which most made me wish I was in the room participating in that conversation. You, dear listener, can send your questions, comments, topic suggestions, or orcish suggestions for their taking the hobbits to Isengard to me at amonsul@ancientfaith.com. You can also message me through the podcast Facebook page. We also truly do welcome guest co-host proposals, as Rob is evidence of. So if you have a chapter you'd like to discuss with us, please make a pitch. Lastly, we would love to receive more photograph submissions of landscapes that resemble Weathertop and the Weather Hills approaching it. We were actually able to feature multiple photos this time because we actually had 3 submissions, but we're only using 2 of them. The opening theme featured a photo from the La Rioja region of northern Spain along the path of the Camino de Santiago. It was submitted by listener Sarah Hutchinson as she shares her own experience of that pilgrimage with all of us. And then the photo that I think will feature during the outro is from the central wastes of Wyoming, near the Wind River Mountains along U.S. Highway 287 between Rawlins and Jeffrey City. It was submitted by listener Curtis Friganti. The 3rd submission was from Michael Haldas, and we're going to save it for next time. So please send us more. We'd love to grow our portfolio. So if you live or work or commute or travel in the vicinity of Weathertop, please share your view with us.
And if you want more of this kind of thing, subscribe to the Amon Sûl podcast on your favorite podcast app, and please rate and review. And look up the Amon Sûl podcast page on Facebook. Click the follow button. Most of all, share with your friends. And while you're at it, if you appreciate this or other Ancient Faith media, go to ancientfaith.com/support and show some practical love.
We've been around since 2019, and you can find our full back catalog of episodes by going to TolkienPodcast.com. Yes, we own that. Or just you can subscribe on your podcast app. The Amon Sûl podcast theme music is Hidden Past, and the closing theme is Celtic Impulse, both by Kevin MacLeod, whose music you can find at incompetech.com.
Our podcast cover art was created by Samuel Hebel. Our video editors / Palantir geniuses are Simon Nelson and Mike DeGan.
And special thanks go to the Amon Sûl Facebook group for conversation, inspiration, and the occasional smackdown to my own musings about Tom and Aule. Yes, really. It happened very early on in the days of the Facebook group. I made this suggestion and was called to the carpet on it. So maybe I got a little of my own back, but only because I have the bully pulpit. Anyway, I am your host, Father Anthony Cook, and even though Father Andrew has to field a proposal for a singles retreat with Tom Bombadil as the keynote speaker giving advice on finding your very own river maid in a shady pool every time he hears me say it, this has been a listener-supported presentation of Ancient Faith Radio.